So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Sakura abandoned Naruto in waves. Part 1. If you guys enjoy this, what if? And if you want to part 2. Comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends. And check out the description. And check out my playlist. So let's start the video. Chapter 1. New rank, new responsibilities. The Nara residence usually was a quiet place as long as Nari Ashino, Shikamaru's mother, was not disturbed, as Shikamaru refers to it from time to time. Today however was different, as Shikamaru had an unexpected and generally unwelcome guest in Shikamaru's book. "Why do you insist on torturing me?" Shikamaru groaned as he moved his piece on the shogi board. The opposition gave a snicker, since when was playing a game of shogi considered torture? "Oh, it's because you know you're going to lose, isn't it?" said the amused voice from Tamari from the other side of the board. Laughably against her words though, she scratched her scowl-bearing head while trying to determine her next move. Shikamaru would have snorted if he wasn't so lazy. "Playing a game of shogi with you is the torture part." Tamari gave a sadistic smirk, unfazed by the insult. "I see how it is then. Don't sweat it, I will put you out of your misery soon then, if you don't give up like you always do." She hissed teasingly as she moved her piece, only to blink when Shikamaru moved his piece a split second after her move. "So he saw my plan there too." While the pair played the game, Shikamaru couldn't help but ask in interest, "So what is it like?" Tamari raised an eyebrow, then understood his question and grinned. "Oh, I don't know, maybe you should become a jounin too and see what it is like," she replied almost like bait. Shikamaru ran a hand through his hair. "It would be troublesome." "Yeah, I know," Tamari said dismissively, almost with a slight trace of disappointment in her voice, while shaking her head. "Sounds like the dimwit I know as Shikamaru," she mumbled. "You could be so much better. But you're too lazy for your own good," she mused as she made her next move. "Check," she announced, causing the silent Nara Shikaku to turn his head and give a brief glance of interest before shaking his head in disapproval, then returning his attention to the dishes his wife appointed him to. Shikamaru sighed. "I was about to say it would be troublesome, but I will consider it." Tamari widened her eyes, but Shikamaru then added with a smirk, "But since you think it's too troublesome, I guess I won't bother." Tamari's left eye began to violently twitch in annoyance. "Why you little?" Tamari released her anger with an almost growl-like grunt, which Shikamaru snickered at, then moved his piece. Tamari gleamed at his knight, shifting for the opening she was waiting for. "Now I got you." She bolted to her piece and announced loudly and proudly, while almost slamming the piece down on the board, "Checkmate Shikamaru." Shikaku didn't show any interest, but internally he snickered while whistling innocently. "You will regret that, Shikamaru." Shikamaru shrugged, uncaring of his defeat. "Oh well, good game." He offered his hand but held it in empty air when he suddenly felt like a type of specimen under a microscope from Tamari's highly suspicious gaze. Shikamaru had no idea how long he was under that microscope for, but he almost jumped out of his skin when Tamari gave an evil smirk. "Best out of two." Shikamaru's sweat dropped. "But you whoa. I know. Maybe we should see if it wasn't a fluke." She interrupted in a chirp, causing Shikamaru to groan in annoyance. "What a troublesome woman." He internally growled, while Shikaku had to control his wide smile and chuckles from being audible. "I warned you, son, a long time ago, women are not to be treated like fools." He internally chuckled as Tamari and unwillingly Shikamaru prepared the board for a second game. "Pair for a drink of tea, Tamari?" Shikaku asked, almost too cheerfully for Shikamaru's liking. Tamari turned and nodded. "Yes please, that would be great, Shikaku-san." Shikamaru's eye twitched at her almost bipolar attitude to how she treats everybody else but him. "Only polite when you are being given something, heh? How typical." Since Shikamaru was stuck in yet another game, he decided to continue their conversation. "So how is Gaara?" he asked in interest. Tamari chuckled. "Well. You might not be able to call him that so freely anymore, Shikamaru." Shikamaru's eyes widened. "So he was." He trailed off as Tamari gave a happy nod as she smiled proudly for her little brother. "Ah, he is now the new Kazekage, or the Godin Kazekage to be precise," she said with her voice full of pride. Shikamaru gave a genuine grin, which was rare for him. "You seem to sound quite glad." Tamari nodded again. "After all the chaos we have been through to get there, yes, I am more than glad and proud of my little brother," she responded in very unnatural softness. Shikaku gave Tamari her tea. "Please allow me to say congratulations to not only your promotion, but to the new Kazekage-sama too," Shikaku said respectfully. Tamari accepted the tea and gave a wide smile. "Thank you, Shikaku-san, I will pass the message on when I return to Suna." Shikaku then resumed his task. Shikamaru then said plainly, "So that was the reason why you are here in Konoha, to announce to Hokage-sama the new Kazekage-sama." Which means you are the new chosen liaison between our countries. Damari gave a faint gasp of surprise. Oh no, really? She teased but took a sip of her drink, then responded in a less joking manner, more or less yes. That is the reason why I am here in Konoha. Shikamaru then raised an eyebrow while he moved his new piece, so what is coming here has to do with your mission. He said in suspicion. Damari glared, oh. So I can't come by and see an annoying and lazy person I call a friend now? She huffed in annoyance. Shikamaru groaned, but he knew what she was doing very easily. Trying to make me apologize won't work. Well, I mean that shouldn't you report to Hoka? Damari's loud sigh interrupted Shikamaru's scolding as she stood up. I best get going then, I must say goodbye to Yoshino-san first. She said way too innocently to reveal the true evil intentions behind it. Shikamaru scoffed at her poker face, it's a bluff. Damari's eyebrow perked when Shikamaru just stared dumbly at her as if not threatened, that was until she called out innocently, Yoshino-san. Shikamaru widened his eyes in alarm, if there was one force on earth he never wanted to face, it was the scolding shouts of that woman. Uh-oh. Wait. He half shouted with satisfying panic to Tamari as he gritted his teeth in annoyance. Curse you woman. I am sorry, that is not what I meant. It is nice for you to visit every time you come to Konoha. He slurred, trying to suppress his sarcasm as much as possible. Damari sat back down with a satisfied smirk across her features at her victory. Oh well, maybe I might stay a while then. She announced as if nothing happened. Damari then added more seriously, I gave the report and announcement to Hokage-sama before I came by, since I got here ahead of schedule, I have time to kill. I do put my duties first. Shikamaru nodded in acceptance, I wasn't accusing anybody. Damari scoffed, sure you weren't. If I am bothering you though. As troublesome as you are, I meant what I said, stay as long as you like. Tamari blinked in partial surprise, but smiled while drinking her tea. Shikamaru sighed, how you are 18 is a mystery to me, you act like a child. He muttered, only to hear choked laughter, how you are only 15 is a mystery to me. You act like an old grouch. Shikamaru was about to rebut until he heard a knock at the door which his mother answered and announced, there is an Anbu here to see you Shikamaru. Shikamaru excused himself, then came back moments later and sighed. Mission? Tamari asked, dropping her playful tone. Shikamaru nodded, I am to report to Hokage-sama right away. He said while he yawned. Damari nodded while standing and placing her fan on her back, then I best be off then. Thank you again for your hospitality Shikaku-san. Shikaku gave a nod in her direction, you're always welcome Tamari. He said as he continued washing the dishes. Tamari and Shikamaru soon left and met the cross path in their journey. I suppose I will see you the next time you decide to drop in. Shikamaru said sarcastically. Tamari grinned, probably, but who knows, you might actually stop by and see me in Suna. You know that we are hosting the next exams. Shikamaru blinked in surprise, but we just finished this round. The village leaders sure don't waste time do they? Tamari nodded. It was part of our agreement with Konoha for this round's exams. Konoha hosted this one and we are hosting the next one. Tamari continued after a brief pause. I will be moving back and forth between Suna and Konoha for the next months in preparation. Hokage-sama tells me I will need a guide since I am Suna's ambassador. Shikamaru emitted a groan, I see where this is going. Tamari sighed in a huff at his familiar lazy antics, I will ask somebody. It is a pain, but sure why not. Tamari blinked in surprise and then smiled, heh, you're not as lazy as I thought. Thanks Shikamaru. Shikamaru lazily threw his hand dismissively from his side. Just try not to be too troublesome. Tamari laughed and shook her head at his antics, best of luck on your mission Shikamaru. Shikamaru nodded but couldn't respond as Tamari said more seriously, consider what I said earlier Shikamaru. You could easily become a jounin if you at least try and stop complaining. Shikamaru ran a hand through his hair. What a pain. I will think about it. Lee unconsciously fiddled with his new vest that he just put on this morning. Lee smirked wide in the mirror at his new addition to his attire, a forest green vest. The vest was zipped up, making it the only real difference from somebody mistaking him for being his sensei, other than the decreasing height difference. Lee then exited his apartment and ran to the training field, where Guy and the others were waiting for a new mission they were planning to take. This time though Lee had a big surprise in stock for them. Within minutes, Lee had made it to the training grounds and spotted his older clone Guy. Nearby was Niji who was waiting impatiently but held a smug grin, as well as Tenten who was twisting a kunai in her hand. Lee was about to make his presence known, but Niji beat him to it. Congratulations on your promotion Lee, now you're only one rank behind me now, instead of two. He announced smugly with a wider smirk as he didn't open his eyes. Tenten dropped her kunai in surprise and gave a wide smile, congratulations Lee, all that training we did was worth it in the end. Lee gave a wide nice guy pose as his eyes became slightly teary, but he didn't sniffle. It is all thanks to you helping me in my training. Lee beamed proudly. I still hadn't noticed, instead he was mumbling something about eternal rivalry and rematch. Tenten tapped Guy on the shoulder to get his attention. Guy-sensei. Guy turned in question and froze in shock at his miniature appearance. Within moments Guy's agape mouth formed a wide sparkling toothy smile. Congratulations on making Lee. That is what I expect from my youthful student. Guy beamed at his younger clone giving off his nice guy pose, only to notice his student was suddenly too excited and in his own world, completely ignoring him in the process. I couldn't completely work out what Lee was crying out loud, but the constant spinning around in a circle on the spot was beginning to make his stomach follow the same motion. Lee. Guy muttered in a futile attempt to calm his student down. Guy tried several times until he knew what he had to do. Result to the traditional way he silenced his student all the time, shut up and listen to me. Guy roared while delivering a swift and bone-cracking punch to the ecstatic Lee's face, knocking the newly appointed Chunin right into the tree. Lee quickly recomposed himself and gave Guy his complete attention. I'm sorry Guy-sensei. I gave another tooth-wide smile, congratulations again Lee. Lee rubbed his runny eyes, thank you, Guy-sensei. Lee said through his tears of joy. Guy then narrowed his eyes in thought. I guess I have to highlight his new responsibilities like I told Niji and Tenten when they got promoted. He concluded then started talking only to be interrupted before he could form one word by Lee, so do we get to go on a new mission now Guy-sensei? No I wa. Or shall we celebrate at a restaurant? No I. Or shall we? Lee received another bone-crushing punch by Guy, then quickly recovered, sorry Guy-sensei. I sighed, as I was saying, as I am sure your youthful intellect recalls what I said to Niji when he got promoted, as a Chunin, there's a high chance of you now being assigned missions with other shinobi other than me, Tenten, or Niji. Becoming a Chunin also requires great responsibility, which is why I am lifting my restrictions on your use of removing your weights and performing the lotus. Lee averted his eyes to the ground looking deep in thought for a moment, then returning his gaze up at his sensei with a look of confusion, but Guy-sensei. When will I know when to use the lotus or even release the gates? I thought he needed a more direct approach. He rested a supportive hand on his puzzled student's shoulder and answered again, Lee, what I am saying is it will be your responsibility to decide when to perform your jutsus. Only when the moment is right will you know what to do. A feminine sign was heard from the side of the two spandex-wearing clones, nah, Guy-sensei, that doesn't really answer. Tenten was cut off by a hand placed on her shoulder, making her cut off her statement midway. Let it go Tenten. She heard Niji mutter through his long and bored sigh. Tenten looked back at the pair in front of her and Niji, and her eyes widened first in shock, but then quickly narrowed. Why did I bother? She whispered more to herself than anyone in particular. The cause of this was when she noticed the furiously nodding and concentrated face of Lee as he was scribbling down in what was now being referred to as that notepad. I waited until his student finished his note-taking and was given the signal by Lee's fixed gaze to continue. There is also the matter of Lee that I am no longer officially your sensei. The sound of a pencil landing on the soft grass was heard as Guy painfully willed himself to not break his hard stare at his now former student. Lee's entire body was stiff and his muscles were tense. The slowly molding sad expression on the noble blue beast's face was enough to push Guy to continue before he burst into tears. However, that does not mean we cannot continue to take missions together as our old team, nor does it mean I will refuse to continue your training. Guy's cheer-up response seemed to work as Lee pulled an unimaginably quick 180, HAWWWW. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. The two embraced themselves as they continued their disturbing shouting match. The other members of Team Guy's sweat dropped, you know. You would think after 3 years of seeing this I would eventually get used to it. Tenten muttered dryly. Unfortunately, Tenten. This is one thing that no matter how hard you try, you cannot change fate. That this will continue to disturb us for the rest of our lives. Tenten's sweat dropped even further at Niji's fate speech, I tend to agree. After what seemed like an eternity for Niji and Tenten, they were relieved of their senseis and teammates' disturbing antics by the pair finally coming apart. Lee still had a few traces of tears along his face however. Now. I shouted after recompassing himself and continuing, let's go report to Hokage-sama for our first higher ranked mission, now that we are all above Genin rank. Hi Guy-sensei. Come Niji and Tenten, if we do not make it to the Hokage's tower in less than 10 minutes, we will have to run 30 laps around Kono. I refuse. Niji barked, derailing Lee from finishing his statement. The Konoha hospital was always a place where there was work to be done and never enough staff at hand. The waiting rooms rarely had a vacant seat at the clinic, its seats full of both civilians and shinobi alike, although most shinobi that entered never stayed long in its walls. It appeared to be a trend for most of the shinobi situated at the hospital to leave, cursing the generally cream-colored building and praying to not return. The double doors opened to reveal the three young genins Mogi, Yuden and the smirking Konohamaru. The trio each had replaced their signature goggles with their unscratched forehead protectors. Konohamaru walked through the main waiting room with the other two trailing behind him as they walked down a path they were used to traveling down often. Turning to a door, Konohamaru knocked, resulting in hearing a female coming call from the other side. Within moments the door was opened to reveal a kunoichi with bubblegum pink hair wearing a red vest and a black skirt. She grinned at her guests, Konohamaru, Mogi-chan, and Yuden. "I told you to stop coming in during my working hours." "Sakura-nichan did say that to us, Konohamaru," Yuden stated in his block nose-like voice that still hadn't changed. The young Sarutobi ignored his teammate. "Of course I remember, but you said we could come if it was important, Sakura-nichan." "Oh? We wanted to tell you about our mission." Sakura shook her head with a smile and closed the door behind her. "How much of an idiot did he make himself, Mogi-chan?" The orange-haired girl chuckled as a result, ignoring Konohamaru's pleading eyes to not say anything. "He got mauled by Daimyo's cat Sakura-nichan." His shoulders slumped as everybody laughed at his gritted teeth cringe. "Stupid cat." Sakura shook her head in recollection, following Naruto's footsteps. "You had the same mission, Sakura-nichan." Sakura nodded her head at Mogi while walking to a door that led them to a small yard in the middle of the hospital. Sakura was getting used to her small fan club, as she called them, that basically made her their boss, since Naruto was still not expected to return to Konoha until 6 months later. The thought of her teammate made her sigh. Naruto. The memory of what she read that day in Tsunade's office was still fresh as ever in her mind, since she thought about him on a regular basis. Arguably as much as her other teammate who was not here, but for a very different reason. While she wanted to talk about what she read to somebody, a part of her resisted the urge. If Naruto never told Sasuke and herself during their time as Team 7, it was obvious that Naruto wanted to keep it a secret. She had two conflicting beliefs though, one understood why he wanted to not say anything and could respect his choice. The other, however, like an opposing contrast, was enraged that he didn't trust them. Time brewing over these thoughts had made her arguments back and forth develop, as one being the winner, but the following day, the victor would be countered, resulting in an indecisive loop. One thing did make sense to her though, she desperately wanted to see his wide smile again, to the point where she was counting down the months remaining like a New Year's Eve. "Something wrong with Sakura-nichan?" Konohamaru asked, while the other two looked as well in slight concern at her deep thought. She shook her thoughts off and smiled. "I just remembered, we had that mission several times in a row. Oh good god, I think I am going to kill that cat if that happens to us." Sakura laughed at the familiar saying, but it was missing the. Naruto said the same thing too. 6 months left. I wonder how you have been going, Naruto. Chapter 2. The Mission Briefing Part 1. Tsunade groaned at the pile of paperwork towering before her. If there was one thing she would never let Jiraiya hear at the end of his insistence that she take this job instead of him, it was about the endless paperwork. She could swear that he secretly knew about this little addition to the job, which was why he was so persistent about it. She would make him pay for it the next time she saw him. Deciding to put her evil schemes on hold, she returned to her current task and groaned in annoyance. She wondered if she released some killer intent that maybe the little thin pieces of papers would quiver away in fear. Although the temptation to then deliver her threat would be exceedingly great if it didn't work. She tried hopelessly anyway, but to her displeasure, the towers of paper didn't budge, the inanimate objects not even intimidated by her thoughts. Before Tsunade could muster up another scheme, her door was kicked open by an alert and kunai-wielding Nara Shikamaru. Shikamaru quickly glanced left and right in the office before turning his attention to the Hokage. "Is everything alright here, Hokage-sama? I felt some killer intent coming from your office and assumed." Shikamaru trailed off as he put away his kunai and returned to his usual lazy stance, although his questioning face remained. Tsunade sighed. Usually she wouldn't go as far as tell the truth, but considering she was tired, still under the influence of her sake, and the fact being it was Shikamaru of all people, she figured why not. "I was wondering if these papers would disappear if they felt my killer intent, but obviously as you can see," she said dryly, waving her hand in the direction of the buildings of papers, "they are still here." "How troublesome," Shikamaru said, returning to his usual neutral and non-interested figure. "Although it is not my place to say, Hokage-sama, you could assign your apprentices parts of the paperwork as well. Considering that." Shikamaru pointed at what could be described as the Empire State Building of the paper stacks, is the hospital reports and medical supply inventory requests. Tsunade didn't say anything at first and blinked a couple of times. "Why didn't I think of that?" her mind scolded. Of course she wasn't willing to allow herself to be humiliated twice in front of Shikamaru within a span of 20 seconds of him entering the room, at least not directly. Of course I know about Shikamaru, but if you will just wait there for 1 minute, Shizune. Within a matter of seconds Shizune came running in, yes Tsunade-sama. You see that very large pile over there? Tsunade waved lazily at the direction of the paper tower of towers her sake-induced mind was beginning to nickname. Shizune gave a quick glance, then returned to Tsunade's serious gaze, although the sudden paleness meant Shizune knew what was coming next. Why yes Tsunade-sama. Shizune said in a surprisingly pleading tone. Even though Tsunade was washed over with a feeling of guilt, she didn't drop her usual official Hokage tone. Take those reports and go through them together with Sakura. If there is anything that requires my attention, bring it to me immediately. Hi Tsunade-sama, I will go find Sakura to help me carry the reports out of here. Shizune whimpered in defeat. Tsunade gave in with a sigh. Afterwards, tell Sakura she can have the rest of the week off, as well as yourself on a small paid leave. Tsunade said, giving a soft smile to her longtime friend and apprentice. Thank you Tsunade-sama. Shizune said in a more brightened mood, giving a quick bow, then excusing herself from the office, closing the door softly. Meanwhile the seemingly invisible Shikamaru stepped back from his retreat corner with clearly an amused expression across his face, but being it was too troublesome to tease, especially the Hokage, he chose not to say anything. What do you have to report? Tsunade asked, feigning innocence. Shikamaru blinked blankly. You asked to see me about a mission you wanted me to lead on. You sent an ambu to my door. Shikamaru mumbled over a yawn, while a part of him questioned how she didn't remember. Tsunade put aside his lazy attitude, since she was long used to it by now, and as much as she scrutinized the shadow user, she could admit he did do his job. Ah yes that's right, but before that, I assume Tamari has already asked you about being her guide. Shikamaru sighed and nodded. I accepted the role. Tsunade nodded, good, I would have forced you anyway. Now, I have that mission paper. Tsunade dragged herself up from her desk and began flicking through the buildings of paper, giving off an occasional curse as she went back and forth between the piles. Here. She shouted triumphantly as she pulled out a fine paper from the pile. What Tsunade did not expect was the paper towers striking revenge by the piles scattering apart on her office floor in a chain reaction. I deem you worthy an opponent of a Sanin. Tsunade was screaming in her mind, crushing the mission paper in her hand while giving a death-inducing glare at the scattered papers on the floor, clearly oblivious to the mumbled troublesome. From Shikamaru behind her. Sensing the killer intent rising from the silent woman, he had to think fast before the situation was going to become a hassle and possibly dangerous for his well-being. This looks like a perfect opportunity for a newly appointed genin team that are eager for a D-rank mission. Shikamaru said in an out-of-character-like enthusiasm, secretly praying Tsunade would buy it. Tsunade gave one more glare at the papers before stomping back to her desk. Sounds like a good idea. Tsunade grunted, although she was secretly scheming for a mixture of sake and a basic, knowing that the combination made one very satisfying fire. Tsunade cleared her throat and stifled those thoughts until she got this over with. Now your mission. So this is the bridge that he and his team fought to protect. Jiraiya mused, while Sanin and Naruto walked across the cement bridge. Naruto had a large smile fixed to his face. Barely named the bridge after me. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. You were bitching 5 minutes ago that you didn't get a symbol like your other teammates did, and now you let that fact sink in. I worry about you. Naruto ignored the Sanin's words as he waved at people passing by who were staring at him agape as if they had just seen a celebrity. So it appears that he is famous here. As if the powers that be had heard Jiraiya musing, a rush of people swamped over them in the dozens. Naruto was shocked at the sudden bombardment of cheers and pens flying demanding his autograph. The blonde's fox-wide smile never left his face as he signed his messy signature in notepads and photos of the old Team 7. Somebody is popular, no? Jiraiya stared at the ecstatic blonde who was finally free from the rabid fans. Hell yeah. I'm awesome. Don't let it get to your head, idiot, remember why we are here. Naruto frowned but nodded. Yasha. Let's go. Jiraiya perked an eyebrow at his student's sudden silence. What's the matter? Naruto was fully agape as he looked around at the town, not recognizing it in the slightest. The old and stale-colored buildings were either gone with new ones, or the old ones had a fresh coating of new paint thrown over them after extensive renovations. There also were more streets than the blonde remembered, hinting that the place had grown in size over time. What almost brought a tear to his eye though were the people that were buzzing along the streets. The most significant change off the bat was the sheer number of people in comparison to the beggar-filled streets of before. Seeing their faces made his agape expression point upwards, as the pained frowns and cringes from before were no longer worn. He was able to depict their wealth as well via their clean and new clothing, which bloomed with vibrant colors compared to the dark colors from before. Was this really the wave they had saved so long ago? Naruto ignored Jiraiya's calls and ran down the familiar streets they traveled down back then, the agape smile never leaving his features. The blonde was once again greeted by smiles from people that recognized him, which to his surprise was almost everybody that laid eyes on him. He didn't even know them in person, yet they knew him. Recognition was something the blonde had longed for in Konoha, but seeing so many faces flying into his gaze made a tear of joy run down his face. Was this overwhelming warmth what acceptance really felt like? Naruto Nai-chan. The blonde's ears perked at the voice and looked over his shoulder to see a face he could have sworn was familiar to him. It was the face of a young boy with black hair and eyes Naruto remembered holding little life in them long ago, and then it clicked to his shock. Ainari. The boy smiled at his stuttered words. It's okay to cry when you're happy, you know. Naruto chuckled, wiping his tears of joy away. Oh, shut up. That was my line to you. How have you been, Naruto Nai-chan? But Inari, how about yourself? You're getting pretty tall now. Not as tall as you have grown it seems. Then Naruto frowned at the chuckling Inari, who was roughly 2 feet shorter than Naruto. Ahem. The sound of an annoyed voice came over the top of their voices as both turned to see an impatient Jiraiya waiting. The Iro-senin. Inari raised an eyebrow at the name. Who is Naruto Nai-chan? He's an old pervert. Aki. Jiraiya swore when this mission was over he was going to give his student a lesson in manners. Chapter 3 The Mission Briefing Part 2. What's the matter, Kakashi? Are you afraid that my overpowering vibrancy of youth is too much for you to handle in a little rematch of our last challenge in eternal rivalry? I said, giving his trademark sparkling grin. Did you say something, Guy? Kakashi said, drifting his only visible eye from his book for a moment before continuing reading. Ah, you are so hip. That is why you are my rival, had a Kakashi. Guy screamed, digging his hands into his surprisingly shiny black hair. Why does it always have to turn out like this? Whatever happened to going to get a mission? Tenten said, clearly annoyed and already bored of the so-called rematch. Niji chose to not say anything, but it was obvious he was agreeing. Tenten's face palmed herself and groaned. Lee. They haven't even started yet. Before Lee could give his response, an Anbu member appeared in front of them, blocking the view of Kakashi and Guy. Rock Lee? The muffled masculine voice behind the bird mask asked. Hi, Lee said, giving the messenger his complete attention. Okage-sama wishes to speak to you in her office immediately regarding a new mission. And after that, the Anbu performed a seal and sunshine away. Tenten learned from years of working together with Lee that standing next to him when an announcement like this was suddenly given, it was best to get away from him since the last time she didn't resulted in a ringing in her ears which lasted several hours. She barely made it in time as she almost seemed to jump a few feet away from Lee's shout, HAWWW. Okage-sama wishes to speak to me about a new mission. He shouted, waving his fist in front of his face as if he was addressing someone to a fight. Excellent work, Lee. Now don't keep Hokage-sama waiting, go. And remember what I said to you earlier. Guy shouted out at near equal volume, giving his nice guy gesture. Hi, Guy-sensei. Lee said and took off towards the Hokage tower, leaving behind a trail of dust in his path. I then turned back to face his rival. Now where were we in my arc? Before Guy could finish his sentence, he noticed that Kakashi wasn't in front of him anymore. Tenten face palmed yet again. He left when you started shouting, Guy-sensei. She muffled through her hand. I started shaking, with his fists clenched, so it's a match of hide and seek, is it, Kakashi? Guy screamed out that caused villagers within a kilometer radius to turn their head in Guy's direction. Alright, if I cannot find you by sunset, Kakashi, I will clean up the entire marketplace with my teeth. Had this been any other time, Niji would have his jaw hitting the ground in disbelief and such a stupid announcement, but spending over 3 years with Guy taught him to look underneath the underneath, so to speak, with this situation. And he discovered one thing. What a troublesome imbecile. Tenten couldn't help but chuckle at the saying coming from her usually silent teammate. Isn't that something Shikamaru would say? Shizune sighed as she entered the hospital and walked to Sakura's office. Something told her that this was not going to be a fun little job. Not as if she would need to speculate, Tsunade usually was asking for assistance from either herself or Sakura most of the time anyway. Reaching Sakura's office, she knocked and waited, only for no response to come after several moments. She tried again and tried the door, only to find it was locked. Maybe Sakura called in sick. Turning to leave, she then spotted who she was looking for through the window. Sakura was in a deep discussion with Mogi, while Konohamaru looked like he was trying something, while Yuden sat back and showed his disapproval. It brought a smile to Shizune as she walked to the entrance and opened the door to let herself out. Now being able to hear what was going on, she shook her head while chuckling, watch Sakura Nichin. This time I will create half a dozen cage bunshin. Oh? At least we are in the hospital then for when you faint. You baka. Sakura Nichin. Shizune's laughter got the others' heads to turn. Konohamaru's still going at that again, is he Sakura? Hi. I swear he is Naruto the second. Ignoring Konohamaru's pout, Sakura addressed Shizune, what do you need, Shizune-senpai? Shizune's delight disappeared with a frown, Tsunade-sama needs our help for some reports. If she wasn't also suffering the same fate, she would see the comedy behind how the instant of a dissatisfied groan escaped through Sakura's forming cringe. How many? The medical reports. A second groan escaped, while the mutter of not again was whispered through it, give me one moment Shizune-senpai. Shizune nodded quizzically, as Sakura quickly returned to her discussion with the displeased Mogi. Now Mogi-chan, if you are serious I will be more than happy to help you. I am not as good as Tsunade-sama or Shizune-senpai though, so you will have to put up with me. Mogi didn't seem fazed though with a wide smile, you mean it Sakura-nichan? Of course I do. Shizune smiled at Sakura's surprised expression when the genin hugged her saying thanks like a broken record, but soon she recovered and returned the gesture. I wonder what Sakura agreed to. Breaking apart Sakura chuckled, follow me, I will get you started right away. The genin only went agape, but Shizune could easily determine how happy she was. Saying goodbye to Yuden and snickering at Konohamaru, who was spinning dizzy after creating 4-cage bunshin, the three Kunoichi re-entered the building. Shizune decided to halt her question for later, as Sakura quickly went into her office and came out with a medical book Shizune recalled herself reading so long ago. This book discusses all about the body and how chakra works, you need to understand this first before we can do anything Mogi-chan. Hi Sakura-sensei. Shizune couldn't hold back the laughter as Sakura went red in the face. Don't call me that, you're only 3 years younger than me. She scolded, recovering from her embarrassment, she continued. I will test you on this later on, so make sure you know it well. Hi, thank you again Sakura seen the eye twitch from Sakura, hinted she shouldn't finish her statement and quickly corrected herself. I mean Sakura-nichan. Good, now go make sure that idiot Konohamaru is still conscious. The genin nodded her head and disappeared, holding the book as if it was a prized possession. Shizune then eyed the smiling Sakura and chuckled, Sakura-sensei. At the mention of the suffix, Sakura hissed, Shizune-senpai. So you want to fill me in on what you agreed to? Sakura rubbed her neck as she followed Shizune through the hospital. Mogi-chan asked me about learning medicine. She told me she wants to be able to help Konohamaru and Yuden when they are in trouble. Knowing Konohamaru is very likely to happen. Shizune nodded with a proud smile, that was nice of you to accept teaching her. Sakura nodded while averting her gaze to her feet. She reminded me of myself. I couldn't refuse. However I am not exactly qualified as a professional medic nin, I hope I don't make a mess of it. Shizune raised an eyebrow at Sakura's fear. I am sure Mogi could find no better person to ask for help. Don't put yourself down so much Sakura. Sakura sheepishly grinned, thanks Shizune-senpai. In memory of what Sakura mentioned before, Shizune decided to voice her thoughts. Only 6 months until Naruto returns now hey Sakura. Shizune blinked at the sudden tenseness flicker across Sakura's body at the mention of the blonde, but Sakura recovered with a neutral nod. Something wrong with Sakura? He contains a Biju within him and he never told me. Yet regardless of that, he never treated me wrongly despite how I treated him. Nothing Shizune-senpai. She said simply, while continuing to walk towards the tower. Shizune gave it some thought and smiled, miss him. Chapter 4 The Mission Briefing Part 3. To say Lee was excited was an understatement, he was being given his first mission as a Chunin, and the Hokage specifically requested him only from his team. While the thought of doing a mission alone gave Lee a bit of a scare at first, he also was overwhelmed with excitement. He would truly be able to make Guy-sensei proud when he completed his mission. Lee was so caught up in his thoughts that he did not see the moving tower of papers he was charging towards and collided with a loud crash, scattering the papers all around the hallway. Joining the papers was a slightly dazed Sakura from the collision. What the hell ran into me Sakura quickly regained her composure on the floor and looked around agitated at all the papers she would have to pick up yet again from the mess in Tsunade's office. Sakura-san, I am so sorry. Lee spoke, offering his hand to help her up. She accepted and extinguished her frustration with an agitated sigh, that's okay Lee-san, but please watch where you're going next time. Sakura said, her voice rising slightly at the end in annoyance. Here let me help, as a way to apologize. Lee said while rolling his sleeves. Sakura wasn't looking at Lee at the time. That's okay Lee-san I said that was all. Right. She stopped and slightly gaped at what she saw. Lee was removing thick weights that were bound to his arms, placing them on the ground with a noticeable mini tremor that Sakura felt from her feet. Holy crap. Just place your arms like this. Lee motioned his arms in a way suitable for carrying this many papers while continuing, and I'll repile them for you. It will only take a minute any longer and I will do 2,000 push-ups while balancing a stack of papers on my back. Sakura honestly didn't know what to say, but did as instructed and murmured a thank you. Within not even a minute, or in Lee's mind, 57 seconds, all the papers were placed back in a pile in Sakura's grasp. Thank you Lee-san. Sakura said, still astounded by the speed. It is a pity you cannot perform ninjutsu Lee-san, you would honestly have a seal-forming speed that would make Kakashi-sensei look like a slouch. Sakura started giving a soft smile. It was then that she noticed the Chunin vest Lee was wearing. You're a Chunin now? That's great. Congratulations Lee-san. Sakura said, giving a more widening smile. Lee was slightly embarrassed from the constant praise while placing back on his wrist weights. Thank you Sakura-san, however I feel I am the one who should be giving praise, you after all are the main reason I made it. Sakura almost dropped her papers when she saw Lee bow in respect, thank you. Lee, unlike many of the others, failed the following exam, despite him making it all the way to a draw in the final matchup. It was an unfair calling by the judge as to why Lee didn't pass. Tsunade offered him a chance to have a special case examination, which required him to complete missions to demonstrate his abilities to be given exemption from the first 2 exams. Sakura had been with him on every one of those missions since Tsunade had assigned her as his examiner. You're welcome, Lee-san. What are you doing here anyway? I was just on my way to see Hokage-sama to receive my first melee and cut off his talk when his eyes widened to a realization he was now running late. Oh no I'm late. Sorry Sakura-san, but I had better hurry. Sakura nodded, knowing very well how angry her sensei was when people were late. But before Lee could depart Sakura looked once again at the now concealed weight wrist straps and her brain began to tick. Such speed like that was such a thing she desperately needed. Lee-san, please forgive me for asking, but when you come back from your mission, could you possibly give me a few recommendations on a starting set for those weight wrists? I would really appreciate that, since Kakashi-sensei has been telling me in spars that I desperately need to improve my speed. Lee gave his own miniature version of the nice guy pose, absolutely Sakura-san, but if I'm gone for too long, feel free to ask Guy-sensei, he knows much more than me. Sakura paled, while Lee was somewhat calm at times, Guy was downright crazy and personally freaked her out. Shaking her head she quickly stuttered a reply. And no. It's fine, I'll wait for you to come back, good luck on your mission Lee-san. Lee waved and then continued his self-proclaimed race to Tsunade's office, leaving behind Sakura looking down at the papers in her hands and letting out a groan. Shikamaru sighed in his seat as Tsunade finished her briefing on the mission. This mission is probably going to be very troublesome, considering he hasn't been in Konoha a long time. I will have to evaluate his newfound abilities if he has any new ones that is. Tsunade nodded in agreement to Shikamaru's plan. That would be a smart thing to do indeed. According to the last letter I received, he has become very different from when he left the village. And Shikamaru snorted, I had a very hard time believing that. Tsunade couldn't help but chuckle. Before the conversation could continue there was a loud knock at the door. Enter. Tsunade announced. The door opened revealing Rock Lee, the expression on his face left Tsunade confused but was soon answered by his quick bow, apologies to Hokage-sama for being late. I accidentally had a run-in with Sakura-san and helped her pick up some reports she had to fill out. It was my fault. Tsunade almost burst out laughing, but a small snicker was all that escaped. That's fine Lee, although I must say I am very disappointed in our newly promoted Chunin that he can't even be punctual for his first mission, that's above C rank as A. I thought your sensei was Guy, not Kakashi. Shikamaru couldn't help but smirk at the reaction Lee was giving from that clearly playful tease from Tsunade. Lee had noticeably paled and his eyes had gone wide. Don't worry Lee, you're actually earlier than I expected. The run-in with Sakura is partly my fault anyway. Shikamaru was about to snicker but suppressed it when he felt Tsunade's glare upon himself. Lee was clearly confused by what was going on but chose to not pursue it further. You wish to see me about a mission, Hokage-sama. Tsunade quickly went to her official Hokage act, yes, I have picked you specifically for a special B rank mission. The rest of Team Guy is being assigned on another mission that doesn't require the full strength of a 4-man cell. Lee couldn't help but wonder what kind of mission his team was going on. Almost as if Tsunade heard his silent question she responded, they are going on a C-rank scouting mission across the border of the Fire Country, where Nijis will be most useful. Lee's mouth hung slightly open, but he quickly recovered himself, I see, but what about Tenten? She has more experience than me as a Chunin. And no. Sorry Hokage-sama, please continue. Tsunade couldn't suppress the smirk on her face, so predictable, just like a certain. Her mind thought. Now where was I? Oh yes. We have received a mission from the Wave Country requesting for protection of their finally restored village. Lee looked down at the floor deep in thought and then brought his gaze up looking at Tsunade, wondering if it was okay to ask a question. Judging by Tsunade waiting patiently for him to acknowledge, he asked, isn't it the same country that Naruto-kun's team saved from Geto? Tsunade nodded. Indeed, since you seem to know about the mission, I assume you know the result of the mission. Lee pondered for a moment before nodding. Geto was killed by Mamachi's abuser, and his gang of thugs were chased out of the village from the rallied-up citizens. Impressed by the Chunin's knowledge, Tsunade gave a small smile. It was then that Shikamaru decided to add his bit of information. Judging by this so-called alias, I am leading to numerous possibilities about the personality or traits of their new leader. The top three being he is either just a typical thug trying to intimidate people, or he is a skilled shinobi in the arts of sealing and/or. Why would he be a sealing master or specialist? Tsunade asked, raising an eyebrow at Shikamaru's theory. If I recall correctly, there are seals that can indeed be used to contact spirits to aid a shinobi in battle. Shikamaru hesitated slightly but continued. Tsunade winced at the memory, but ushered Shikamaru to continue, in saying that Orochimaru also used forbidden jutsus to revive the deceased previous Hokages. Following this, I don't see how it could be too far-fetched for there to be more spirits out there that can be summoned, and maybe this demon of fear is one of them. Shikamaru paused briefly, flickering a quick gaze between the two other people in the room, surprised to see that Lee was showing signs of understanding his theory. Maybe he underestimated the miniature guy's intelligence by placing him in comparison to a certain blonde knucklehead. He was more than interested when Lee decided to add his own input. Ninjutsu would aid this person as well, since he would be able to fool people into believing they are seeing an actual demon, when in actual fact it's nothing real. Both Tsunade and Shikamaru nodded. Tsunade fixed her gaze to Shikamaru. What is your third possible theory on this demon of fear's identity? Shikamaru sighed, scratching the back of his neck briefly before answering. There is a chance that maybe this person is related to Geto personally and is taking over the business, so to speak, the inheritance. Do we at all know if Geto had any family? Tsunade briefly looked out her window and thought, then turned back to Shikamaru. I'm honestly not sure if he did. I had read over Kakashi's report of that mission before summoning both of you earlier and found nothing, but that idea doesn't sound too unrealistic either. Tsunade gave the theories a run over in her head before deciding to continue with the briefing. The both of you will be traveling to Wave together. Once you have arrived, you will make contact with Uzumaki Naruto, who will be waiting for you around the border of the bridge outside Wave. At this, Lee's interest perked. Naruto-kun will be joining us. But isn't he training with Jiraiya-sama and not meant to return to Konoha for another half a year? Lee asked, although he could not contain that bit of excitement in his voice. Lee and Naruto saw each other as rivals in a way after what happened with Sasuke and had numerous spars before he left for his training. The thought of catching up with Naruto again earlier than expected would indeed be great, even though it was for a mission. Lee was dragged out of his thoughts by hearing Tsunade sigh. Well, you see, Jiraiya said he has some important matters to handle and he doesn't want Naruto around to deal with. Seeing as he found out about this mission and the information we have so far, Jiraiya decided to include Naruto as a mandatory team member for this mission. I swear, if this is just all part of some plan for your research, I will beat you to death the next time I see you. Tsunade mused in annoyance to the frog but didn't share it with the two Chunin. Shikamaru will be leading this team if by chance assistance is needed at all. Naruto has been instructed by Jiraiya to use a toad to send a message back to us requesting reinforcements. I wouldn't want to send too many shinobi out in case this entire incident is a mere bandit situation. Especially since we are quite low on available shinobi at the moment due to numerous missions. Will the payment we received for this mission covered B rank? The honest truth told to us by our client is that the mission can be anywhere from C ranked up to possibly A ranked. But we need to make contact with the client. Shikamaru asked. Tsunade shook her head. Naruto knows the client personally from Team 7's first mission and he already has made contact and gathered all the information you will need. If you need to speak to the client once again because you forgot, I'm sure you will know what to do. Tsunade said, chuckling lightly at the end of the last part. Shikamaru had one more question on his mind, but he had a feeling he knew the answer he was going to receive. Hokage-sama, I would like to make a request for an additional team member on this team for this mission. Tsunade raised an eyebrow, but nodded her head to signal Shikamaru to continue. Well, I am aware you already said you are short on the number of available shinobi. For a mission that carries a very large risk of potentially becoming extremely dangerous, we are missing a very vital team member. While it is a smart idea to have a team consisting of a tactician and two very strong offensive fighters, what is the use if one of us, namely Naruto and Lee here, get badly injured or worse, poisoned? As team leader, I am responsible for their lives, and I know that we are simply too far from Konoha to get a rapid response rescue if something did happen. What I am asking is that a medical nin is added to the team. Tsunade sighed. She knew very well that Shikamaru would ask this, especially considering what happened to his best friend, Choji and Niji, and even Naruto during his first Chunin mission. Tsunade also knew he was right and didn't want to have that mistake happen again. Alright Shikamaru, I know who I would trust with such a task. And chances are she is going to be very thankful for it, since you just saved her from paperwork which will be coming back to me again. Chapter 5 The Mission Briefing Part 4. Sakura usually is more than happy to help Tsunade out with anything, but that doesn't mean she wasn't allowed to hate the task she was lifting from her sensei's shoulders. She read over the medical report once again before signing her name where required, then placed it in the start of a new pile, then almost robotically reached for the next report and began reading. Sakura's office wasn't exactly large, but considering that this was the first office ever appointed to her, she by far didn't complain, especially since it was usually given to the head doctor of the hospital's department. The office contained a small rectangle desk, which contained a small shelf with pencils and other instruments. On top of that shelf was a two-sided photo frame. Inside it was a picture of her parents and herself on the left and a picture of Team 7 on the right. On the right side of her desk was a lamp. The desk had two seats on the opposite side for addressing patients. There was also a large shelf to her left side, filled by numerous well-used medical books that Tsunade had passed to her. On the right side of the room, there was a small coffee machine, which she found always needed repairing from extensive use. To be honest, the whole feeling of having an office to herself at such a young age terrified her, but Tsunade insisted that she would benefit from the experience. Sakura let off a sigh and then signed the report while repeating the same process again. Occasionally Sakura would glance at the photo frame, more particularly the Team 7 photo. Usually depending on what mood she was in, she would either have good or bad memories from their time almost reaching 2 years ago. Luckily for her, today was a good memory. She remembered the time when Naruto had somehow convinced Sasuke and herself to attempt to discover a mystery that still hasn't been solved today, the mystery of what was behind Kakashi's mask. They had tried numerous things which resulted in complete failure and partial humiliation as well. Finally they resorted to just asking their sensei up front. The result was what neither of the three predicted. There was another mask behind Kakashi's mask. At first Sakura would claim that was the most humiliating day ever in her life, but now has come to recognize that this was one of the best memories of Team 7. A knock on her door brought her back to reality. She called, while quickly signing the next report. She wasn't expecting Tsunade to walk in, especially during the busiest hour of the day, for the Hokage at least. "Tsunade-sama?" she asked with clear surprise on her face. Sakura was rewarded with a smile from her sensei. "How are the reports going about Sakura?" Tsunade read her apprentice like a book but decided to tease, "Is that so? I guess then I won't lighten your load then and ask Shizune to go on this mission No. I am Aya." To say Sakura was embarrassed was an understatement and refused to look her sensei in the eye. That changed soon however when her sensei began laughing. "Sakura, it's alright, I'm just teasing, you need to work on your fake smiles more if you want to fool old me. Shizune is becoming a veteran in that department. You are practically an open book to me. As always." Sakura decided to at best drop the topic before she embarrassed herself more. "Would you like some tea? It will help with the sake." Tsunade took a seat and crossed her arms, giving a harsh stare at her apprentice, who says I have been drinking sake. Really Sakura, I do not drink when on duty. The result was her apprentice meeting her gaze with a smug grin, followed by what appeared to be a long staring contest. "You need to work on your fake scowls, I believed Tsunade-sama. I suppose some tea would keep me awake," Tsunade said in defeat. Sakura chuckled as she got up and started making Tsunade and herself some tea. "You said something about the Tsunade-sama mission?" Sakura inquired as she handed the cup over to her sensei. Tsunade took several sips before answering, "Yes, I would like you to join a team consisting of Nara Shikamaru, Rock Lee, and Uzumaki Naruto." Tsunade chose then to stop and wait for that piece of information to sink into her currently wide-eyed apprentice. Many things flew through Sakura's mind, but she voiced her biggest question. "Naruto? But what about?" Tsunade sighed. Jiraiya apparently has an important issue that he wants to handle without Naruto's presence. Coincidentally, this mission was discovered soon after Jiraiya was trying to find something for Naruto to do. But since the Akatsuki may be after him soon within the next few months, it is too dangerous to leave Naruto alone. Tsunade finished in her head since she received Kasuke's second letter before arriving at the hospital. Sakura knew her sensei well enough to know when she was hiding something and was about to speak, but then quickly hesitated. Tsunade gave her apprentice a questioning gaze. "What is wrong, Sakura?" Sakura hesitated again, nibbling on her lower lip, wondering if it was right to voice what she had done. Sakura eventually responded, "Is this to do with the Kyuubi?" Tsunade almost fell right out of her chair in shock. "How the when did Sakura?" Her apprentice was avoiding Tsunade's shocked gaze. After a brief pause to calm herself, Tsunade spoke calmly, "Sakura, how do you know about Naruto's?" Tsunade voiced the first assumption that came to her head in a rush. "He told you?" A slight glimpse of hurt flashed over the apprentice's eyes, but she shook her head. Sakura had trouble keeping eye contact with Tsunade, but she spoke apologetically. "I was browsing around in Naruto's medical history by accident while tidying up your office. That time I broke my arm, the first time. I was interested to find out about how Naruto was able to have such a ridiculous amount of stamina and how his wounds seemed to heal faster than normal. I honestly thought it was some rare type of Kekkei Genkai. And I just wanted to get to know him better. I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama." "I just wanted to know how it was possible for somebody like Orochimaru to exist. And if being a pervert was hereditary. However, Sakura, I have to ask you this." Sakura finally met eye to eye with her sensei. "Did you talk to anybody about this?" Sakura shook her head, her hurt eyes being revealed again. "Naruto didn't tell either me or Sasuke-kun. So I assumed he really didn't want anybody to know about his burden." Tsunade raised an eyebrow at her apprentice's choice of words. "Burden? Does that mean?" Sakura rarely showed any signs of anger towards her sensei, but the scowl Tsunade was sure was giving a lot of it. "Of course I don't think Naruto is a demon. He is my teammate and my friend. Last time I checked, demons do not risk their lives to protect others, nor do they care to help the people around them, even if they are being treated like an outcast." Sakura said, but quickly realized who she was talking to and averted her eyes to the floor. Before she could mutter her apologies, Tsunade beat her to it. "Well said." Sakura was honestly caught off guard and returned her gaze to her sensei slightly shocked before calming down into a soft smile and drinking some of her tea. Tsunade decided to bite on her curiosity. "That sounded a lot like an apology to my ears though, Sakura." Sakura nodded slowly, earning her sensei to shake her head. "You are still blaming yourself, aren't you? You know he never hated you for the way you treated him, as exaggerated as you make it. I won't scold you this time, you know what I told you about this before. Is finding out about the Kyuubi why you always have been so quiet when I dropped his name?" Sakura nodded, earning Tsunade a sigh. "I see. My answer to you before still stands though, but if you really feel you want to apologize to him, be my guest." Dismissing the topic, Tsunade asked her apprentice, "I am sure you have a lot of questions you have wanted to know for some time." Sakura took a moment to adjust to the topic change, but nodded, "I have so many. But I feel I should ask Naruto, it's only right if I do. So what is this mission really about, Tsunade-sama?" Tsunade decided to start from the beginning, telling Sakura about the mission of Wave and then her new discovery. "I suppose there is no point in lying to you anymore, Sakura. To be honest, I thought this was one of Jiraiya's plots to continue his so-called research until I received this message from a toad on my way to see you." Tsunade lifted a folded paper from one of her pockets and passed it to Sakura. Sakura unfolded the message and recognized the handwritten clearly as Jiraiya's. "Tsunade. I will keep this brief, let's say I forgot to attach this letter to you as well with the mission report. My spies have gotten word on the whereabouts of a possible outpost used by the Akatsuki. According to the information my spies have discovered, they have several locations scattered around each country. Well, I need to investigate this, I don't want to carry the risk of Naruto being captured if something were to happen. I expect to spend approximately a week to reach the destination and return to Wave. In case I take any longer, I have instructed Naruto to follow your appointed team for the mission back to Konoha. Take care of the Gaki for me and you will hear from me again soon. Jiraiya." As Sakura read the letter, Tsunade observed her apprentice's expression change numerous times. Once Sakura was finished, she glanced up at her sensei puzzled. "What is Akatsuki? And what does Jiraiya-sama mean by Naruto's capture?" Tsunade finished the rest of her tea in one large gulp then began, Akatsuki is a group of S-classed missing nin who have joined together as a group to capture the. Before Sakura could ask her next question Tsunade answered, Jinchuriki is basically a name that was made during the early times of the Third Shinobi War for people who have a bijuu sealed within themselves. Sakura frowned, clearly disapproving of the sound of the word. The thought of labeling somebody like Naruto as a type of weapon or thing was something she detested strongly. However, Sakura chose to say nothing and allowed Tsunade to continue. We still do not know their goals, but we know their objective is not the people themselves, but their tenants. Jiraiya has discovered through his spies that they have some means of extracting the bijuu out of the person. Sakura released the breath she was holding unconsciously, then wondered, but would that relieve the person from their burden? Tsunade shook her head and showed a grim expression, unfortunately, no Sakura. You see, since a bijuu's chakra is so unstable it requires to be sealed within a newborn child, when as you know, their chakra coils haven't developed, meaning there is the ability for the coils to change depending on circumstances. Once the child's coils develop, they develop around the bijuu's chakra, meaning they are constantly relying on it. Tsunade noticed her apprentice's eyes widened and her skin paled to ghostly white. Sakura knew then exactly what would happen if the bijuu was successfully extracted from the person. That means. Sakura couldn't even finish her sentence due to the shock. Tsunade chose to nod her head without giving an answer, although she was growing worried, judging by her apprentice's sudden change in mood. He kept this from us. People were hunting for his life, and he didn't tell us. Finally Sakura spoke just above a whisper, Tsunade-sama. How long have they been after Naruto? At first Tsunade was going to lie, but knew better, although she knew her apprentice wasn't going to like what she was about to hear. Nearly 3 years now before the incoming storm of a panicked apprentice could surface, Tsunade quickly barked loudly, however. Then spoke in her normal voice, seeing as her apprentice was choosing to wait, although the noticeable twitching on Sakura's face showed she was growing impatient. Because of Jiraiya's presence and some unknown factors, they haven't attempted to capture Naruto for the entire time of his training, nor will they attempt to capture him again until several months later. And you shouldn't be mad at him for not telling anybody about his situation. Sakura's eyes widened slightly more, and Tsunade gave a small smile, you're a book. He doesn't want his friends to get involved or hurt for his cause or issues. Since you are his teammate, you should know that better than anybody else. Sakura winced as Tsunade finished her scolding, but nonetheless agreed, yes Tsunade-sama, you are right. But 3 years. Sakura shook her head frantically, as if all her musing for the year overwhelmed her. Why? Did he not tell us why? What was he trying to prove? That he didn't need help. Why was he so scared to trust Sasuke-kun and me? Was it because of the way I treated him? Why? Tsunade decided not to talk, understanding that Sakura was venting out so many questions that had built up over time. Finally calming she recompassed whipping away a stray tear, sorry Tsunade-sama. It's fine Sakura, it's fine. Tsunade said comfort, not knowing when she came around and patted her apprentice's back, which succeeded in calming her nerves. I am just so angry. But at the same time so confused. I see Naruto's reasons why he didn't tell me, I really do, but at the same time it hurts. People do dumb things to protect those important to them, Sakura. That is something I can speak from experience. Tsunade mused, remembering all the times Jiraiya and even Orochimaru protected her from danger at their own expense. Sakura slowly nodded her head, I know. I will talk to Naruto when I get the chance to. Tsunade smirked, talking. You liar. Sakura formed a grin and shrugged, I promise not to hurt him too much. Tsunade gave an amused HMPH while glancing up at the clock on the wall. Well I'll be here for almost an hour, and I told your other 2 team members I would be right back in 10 minutes. Not that I think Shikamaru would mind. Hell, he probably is thankful, but the thought of Lee not doing well. Anything for an hour is something I don't think is possible. Tsunade patted her apprentice on the back once more in comfort before gesturing her to stand, we better get going. Sakura obliged, paying one last glance at her desk as she began summarizing all the new information she had just been told, further filling in blank holes in her mind, but at the same time opening up new ones. We are going to have a long talk about Naruto. Chapter 6 The Mission Briefing Part 5. Women, why are they so troublesome? Shikamaru thought lazily. She said 10 minutes, yet it has been almost an hour and a half. What in God's name are they doing? Oh well, guess it helps me get to know my other team members better. At this Shikamaru turned his gaze to see Lee in deep concentration, it was surprisingly disturbing to see, considering the miniature guy's usual hyperactiveness and crazy attitude. After 20 minutes had passed when Tsunade left, Shikamaru noticed a shogi box hidden underneath a stack of papers. With a little bit of convincing, he was able to persuade Lee to a game. Shikamaru was surprised, though, when Lee showed that he already had an understanding on how the pieces worked and knew the purpose of the game. Interest got the better of him, and Shikamaru asked Lee how he knew surprisingly quite a fair bit about shogi. During one of Guy-sensei's matches with his eternal rival, Kakashi-sensei, Guy-sensei was challenged to a match of shogi. During the entire game I had no understanding of what was going on at all. So I took it upon myself to find out about how the game worked. It was then that I discovered the true secret to the game. It is all about strategy. Depending on the person's strategy, you are also able to learn a bit about that person's personality. Those that constantly play on the offensive usually are quite hasty in battle and usually do not think before they act. People that play on the defensive are the opposite, they think about their actions thoroughly, but because of this, they lack the courage to act or act too slowly. The issue is trying to understand the opponents that can switch back and forth between these strategies. For example, Shikamaru-kun is such a person. To say Shikamaru was amused by that insight was a severe understatement. I will never think of this person as a fool ever again. Well, at least not all the time. The pair had played one game so far, which to no surprise Shikamaru won, but that wasn't to say it was a walk in the park for his victory. Well, true to Lee's theory, Lee himself was an offensive type player, but he was occasionally switching tactics when an opportunity was available, which did cause Shikamaru to get his queen captured. 10 minutes into their second game, the door opened revealing Tsunade and Sakura. Their expressions were neutral at first, but when they saw what was happening in front of them, both of them went agape. I had a shogi board in this office. No, scratch that, Lee is playing shogi were some of the thoughts passing through both Kunoichi's minds. Lee was completely oblivious to the matter however and looked up from the board at the newcomers. Ah, hello again Sakura-san. It is good to know we have one of the best medic nin in Konoha excluding Hokage-sama joining us on this mission during the springtime of our youth. Lee beamed. Sakura had long gotten used to the constant praises she received from her patients and fellow shinobi, at least she does not blush in embarrassment too much now. Thank you Lee-san. Sakura said, still slightly baffled by his addition of youth at the end of his praise. Shikamaru in turn looked back at Lee for a moment. How can he be so intelligent one second then become a complete baka the next? At least Naruto was as consistent. Tsunade cleared her throat and returned to her seat behind her desk, taking a quick glance at the shogi board to see who was winning before sitting down. She looked up at her chosen team for this mission. Lee and Shikamaru were now standing side by side on Sakura's right, giving the Hokage their complete attention. Does this team now appear satisfactory to your eyes, Shikamaru? Tsunade inquired, almost daring Nara to object. Shikamaru nodded. Indeed it does Hokage-sama, with the addition of Sakura on the team, if the situation does become dire, at least now I know we have great medical support, as well as another strong fighter if needed. Sakura tried as best as she could to resist smiling, but the corner of her mouth twitched upwards against her will. Is there anything else we need to know before we leave for the mission, Hokage-sama? Lee asked, getting eager to finally begin his first mission as once Lee asked his question, Sakura's face returned to neutral and she shared a brief look with Tsunade, which went unnoticed by both Shikamaru and Lee. Other than you will be leaving this late afternoon, no, there is nothing else. Please give my regards to Naruto though when you see him. Tsunade said a bit harsher than she intended at the start, but only Sakura noted and understood what Tsunade really was implying. Flashback Hokage Tower, 15 minutes before present. Sakura and Tsunade were not far from the office now. After the briefing on the way, not much else was discussed until Sakura had one question she was cursing herself for not asking earlier. Tsunade-sama. Sakura said hesitantly. This had made Tsunade stop and look eye to eye with her apprentice. After that brief exchange of glances, Tsunade made a small detour into the Sandame's old supply room and turned the light on, then made sure nobody was listening in before turning to Sakura. What is on your mind, Sakura? She asked, waiting patiently. Sakura took a few more moments to ponder what to say, then looked back at her sensei. What do we tell Shikamaru and Lee-san? I mean do they need to know about Naru? No, they don't need to know. Tsunade said in a tone that left no room for argument to any normal person. Unfortunately for Tsunade, Sakura wasn't one of those people. But Tsunade-sama. Tsunade's sigh forced Sakura to stop. Sakura, the Sandame made a law saying that nobody was allowed to discuss what truly happened to the Kyuubi in public and forbade it that the younger generation such as yourself knew the truth. Anybody that broke this law initially was executed. Sakura gasped, but Tsunade continued. The only person that is allowed to tell the truth publicly is Naruto and only Naruto. Sakura broke her gaze and nodded, although she clearly was not satisfied with that answer. Tsunade let out yet another sigh, then decided to add, but. Sakura looked back up at her sensei. If I know him for what he truly is and acts, similar to say, yourself. He will be stubborn till the end if something involving the Akatsuki does happen on this mission. He will most likely try to cover it up for the team's safety. If, and only if the situation comes to that, I am giving you permission to let the others know about Naruto. Sakura looked hard into her sensei's glass-shattering gaze, she knew how serious her sensei was being about this. Sakura returned the favor with the same gaze back to let her sensei know how serious she was being with this as well. You have my word, Hokage-sama. Then flashback. Shikamaru gave a quick glance at both of his teammates, noticing Sakura was in deep thought, but chose to speak anyway, since it would be too troublesome to ask what was on her mind. We will meet in front of the gates at sunset, we will move out then. We should be able to make it to Wave by tomorrow late afternoon, assuming we have a brief 3 to 5 hour break during the night before continuing. Shikamaru said, secretly thanking God he wouldn't have to repeat it again, as Sakura was paying attention to him once he started talking. A chorus of highs were heard between the two other team members as they all exited the room to get ready for their mission. Chapter 17 prepares Noble Blue Beast. Lee quickly began packing a few of his belongings in his pack. His choices of outfits involved his traditional green spandex, along with 2 spares, a summer spandex with short sleeves for his arms and cutoffs at his knees. And finally a winter spandex which used thicker materials in case it was cold. Guy-sensei always told him it was good to carry more just in case. As for weapons, Lee prepared the normal set of kunai, however, instead of carrying an extra holster, he replaced it with his nunchucks, which he had trained extensively with. Tenten and Guy trained him by using them in combination with his strong taijutsu before he entered the Chunin exams. Then Lee brought his gaze down to his other tool on his bed. During the preparation period for the 3rd exam, Tenten insisted Lee add an additional weapon to his inventory to master. This is when Tenten presented him with a double-edged spear. The spear itself was more common for a samurai to use instead of a ninja, however Tenten lectured Lee that the weapon was similar in a way with the nunchucks. Meaning they required a great understanding of martial arts to be effective in battle. Using the weapon only for impaling your opponent by far wasn't the only thing it was effective for, especially for somebody of Lee's caliber. The most unique feature about the weapon was that the spear posed the ability to retract to a mere fifth of its original size, hiding the edged blades on its sides, making it safe to hold while retracted. The mechanism to extend the spear was by pressing 2 buttons in the center simultaneously. Once done, the spear would extend to its true size, being 6 feet in length within a second. This meant if the wielder was not careful he could potentially cut, or worse, impale themselves if they extended it while holding it at a wrong angle. Lee almost impaled himself in the chest before Tenten stopped him. That had Lee earned Tenten giving him a severe scolding, and also what surprised him and to an extent Tenten as well, was a solid punch in the head from none other than Niji for his near-fatal mistake. Attaching the spear to his utility belt, he then finished packing any food supplies he needed. Lee figured that since they were staying in waves during most, if not all of the mission, he packed enough to last him the day's journey and placed his water canteen next to the supplies. Finally Lee attached his traditional weights to his legs and arms. It was then that he remembered the conversation he had earlier with Sakura and her interest in beginning using a set. Lee walked into the living room and turned to the training room of his apartment where he had all of his training equipment including old weights. As a congratulatory gift for making his recovery from the exam incident with Gaara, the rest of Team Guy chipped in and brought him a special set of weights for the arms that had the ability to change how much they weighed on the fly. All it required was a single sheep seal, making contact with the weight you wanted to adjust with your palm, and then channeling chakra to increase or decrease the weight. This is where Team Guy forgot the fact that Lee cannot use seals. Lee didn't mind at all for the hiccup and in fact was eternally grateful for the gift even though he couldn't use it. However, these weights were beyond valuable for someone with what many shinobi describe as perfect chakra control, the very thing Sakura is known for. With these she could change them to anything from a mere pound up to 150 pounds at no extra expense. That's not to say the cost of these weights alone were equal to roughly 5 to 6 sets of different weights. Picking up the weights, he eyed them closer. The weights were very similar in appearance to a traditional bracelet, colored a golden yellow tone, making the untrained eye simply write them off as worthless, which very much was opposite from the truth. The only other eye-catching feature was the small white square decoration in the center of the weight, where they would display the kanji for the amount they were set to. Placing the contents at the top of his pack, Lee took one last look around his apartment, sparing an extra second on a framed photo of Team Guy on the wall of his bedroom. The picture was taken after their first C-rank mission together. The picture had Guy standing tall in the back giving his nearly impossible shining grin, with Lee in the middle, giving a nice guy pose. Niji had his arms crossed and had a neutral expression on his face to Lee's left. Tenten had a wide grin and posed with a kunai being balanced on the tip of her finger on her right hand. Everyone, wish me luck and I will make you all proud for believing in me and helping me get to where I am now. Lee thought as he made his way out the door of his apartment. Chapter 18 prepares Godim's apprentice. Sakura, unlike the other members, went to the marketplace. She needed to stock up on medical herbs for the mission before packing her personal equipment. Through extensive reading, she understood that there were several common herbs that can be used and mixed to combat nearly most traditional poisons used by shinobi and bandits. Assuming the medic nin gets their diagnosis correct on the type of poison ailed on the patient, mixing the correct herbs can cure the poison within minutes. The problem was though how quick the medic nin could determine the type of poisoning and how long the patient had been suffering from the poison. The longer it took, the more the ailment would spread throughout the patient's body, meaning more herbs would have to be used. The more disturbing fact to this as well was the patient's health deteriorating over long periods of time from exposure to the poison. Sakura herself had treated shinobi that had returned to Konoha while exposed to the poison for days. The result was numerous treatments, as well as being bedridden for weeks. The pharmacist greeted Sakura as she entered the store. "Greetings Sakura-sama, what can I do for you today?" Sakura flushed in embarrassment and replied, "AMA, as I keep telling you, just Sakura is fine." The pharmacist nodded, although Sakura knew she would still call her Sakura-sama. Sakura still hadn't quite become accustomed to being idolized yet by other villagers or fellow ninja. It was a thought that she honestly expected to never happen throughout her life. That quickly changed however after her first official mission as a medic nin. The town of that mission consisted of hundreds of civilians that lived a few miles away from Konoha. Some sick bastard thought it would be funny to poison the town's water supply, causing a widespread exposure to the people and animals of the town to a poison. The poison itself wasn't lethal, it did however cause symptoms equivalent to the flu, along the addition of mild hallucinations and general lack of energy. Tsunade herself was going to go and help the town, but the elders were practically breathing down her neck denying it. Seeing as the other medic nin were all out on mission she turned to now their only hope, Sakura. Sakura traveled together with Shikamaru to the town, and the sight she saw was something she wasn't going to forget for the rest of her life. The town was in a complete state of disaster. Children were crying and trying to embrace an invisible being, dogs were baring fangs at inanimate objects, and numerous elderly people were bedridden. She felt tears full when she learnt that the town had already suffered numerous losses not only from the elderly, but even from young children. The old Sakura before becoming an apprentice to the godame would have cried and done nothing because deep down she knew she could do nothing. However the new Sakura was by far not incapable and quickly wiped away her tears and went straight to work on creating a vaccine. That was the first non-traditional poison Sakura had ever cured. By the end of the day, Sakura had cured over several hundred villagers and pets in the town. Sakura didn't stop there though, she then began working out a way to remove the poisoning from the water supply without making the water unhealthy to drink. It took a bit of convincing from weary villagers, but after Sakura had given a demonstration by drinking the water herself and showed no signs of the poisonous effects, the villagers began drinking again. The bastard was never caught, but Sakura swore to herself that when the person was found, she would personally give them a taste of the pain they had caused to that town. It was only days after that mission where there were numerous talks and praises about her in the village. She even heard the occasional praise of the next Tsunade come her way every now and then. A few days later came the idolizers from nurses and new shinobi alike. It had been 3 months since that mission, and being considered an idol was still something Sakura was coming to terms with. After she had brought the herbs she needed to the desk and paid for them, Sakura sealed them into her special sealing scroll that contained her other medical tools which she carried in her weapons pouch at all times, then bid her farewell to the pharmacist and began her journey home to begin packing. She paused down the street not long though, at the recollection of what happened earlier in her office. It appeared her wish of wanting to see Naruto earlier than before was being granted to her surprise, only she felt less ecstatic about it than before. "Eh? I think your forehead is getting bigger again." Sakura shot her eyes up from the ground to see the person that just teased her and groaned, "What do you want, Ino?" The platinum blonde-haired Kunoichi's eyebrow rose, "Just picking up herbs of course, since I am a medic nin too you know." Sakura chuckled while pointing her thumb behind her. "The pharmacist is back there. I am here." "Open it and tell me what's up Sakura." Sakura frowned at her best friend but explained the mission, ironing out mentions of the Kyuubi in her summary as she had done whenever Naruto was brought up. Ino's eyes widened but a grin formed. "So you are catching up with Naruto? That's great then." "Yeah." Ino's lone visible blue eye narrowed on her friend, "Don't tell me those stupid thoughts are still lurking around inside your billboard of a forehead Sakura." Sakura cursed the day she opened up with Ino about that, they could be. "I swear you are hopeless." "Shut up." Sakura didn't know when she turned and walked with Ino back to the pharmacist. "What do you think I should do?" Ino clicked her tongue while opening the door to let them back in, "Get over it of course you idiot." Despite how simple it sounded, the actual carrying out of the action was impossible to Sakura's will. Ino frowned while going through the aisles, grabbing the herbs she needed, with her silent follower behind her. I treated Choji and Shikamaru the same in a way to Sakura. Did you ever hit them though? No. Ino watched her friend's down demeanor deepen and she shook her head while continuing, that doesn't mean I didn't give them a lot of flack though. So what did you do? Well, I didn't sulk like you have been about it. I simply chose to accept I was being stupid and made it up by treating them the way I should have originally. But Ino, he wasn't even here. And what stopped you from writing to him? Hokage-sama surely would have been happy to pass along any message. And don't even say he could have written to me, this is Naruto we are talking about after all. Ino formed a smile while bringing her items to the counter. It has worked for me, you should give it a go. Sakura gave a small grin, I guess I will try. Ino opened the door to allow them both out while giving her friend a nudge, hey, cheer up forehead, you should be happy you're seeing Naruto earlier than expected. Don't you lie to me and say you haven't missed his loud shouts. Sakura shrugged while forming a more genuine smile, I have missed him. You should get him something. Huh? No, something to plant a smile on his face, it will make you feel better too. Sakura blinked for a few moments and shrugged, what do I get him for? Ino groaned while facepalming at her friend's stupidity and childishly flicked Sakura's forehead, you're his teammate. You should know the loud-mouthed shrimp better than me. Ino gave it a second's worth of thought and voiced her answer like it was a fact. Ramen forehead. Isn't it obvious? Sakura rubbed her neck sheepishly, oh. Well, best of luck on your mission Sakura and be happy for God's sake, Naruto will probably be surprised to see you. Thanks Ino. Ino then left Sakura on the street while Sakura nodded her head and decided she would follow Ino's advice on bringing to Naruto the food he loved the most. She didn't get far though when she caught a glimpse of Guy, who appeared to have. Well, Sakura didn't know what else to call it other than garbage in his mouth. The fact that he was walking around on his hands instead of feet didn't help either. She could have sworn she heard mutters coming from the man, cursing a former sensei she was familiar with. Sakura knew better, but her interest was killing her and she approached Guy. Meanwhile, Guy on that matter was struggling to find a way to place the garbage in the bin, considering that his head was a mere foot from the ground and the bin was 4 feet tall. Guy-sensei, what are you doing? Sakura asked when she had noticed that what was in Guy's mouth was a very old and rotted banana peel, she had to turn her head in disgust. Usually Sakura had matured enough to avoid using what she referred to as girly terms, but only one thought came, you. By this time Guy had worked out some bizarre way to get the rubbish in the bin and then came back to his feet before addressing Sakura. Your sensei indeed is a slippery one Sakura, he won in our match of hide and seek and as part of my failure, I am cleaning up this marketplace with nothing but my teeth. Guy beamed, unbelievably happy, even though his task ahead was extremely revolting. Something tells me, Kakashi-sensei made himself scarce when you were distracted and you assumed he was challenging you to a children's game of hide and seek. You idiot. Sakura mused, I see. Was all she could muster up, trying as best as she could to keep her face neutral, although it was clearly turning to disgust. I was oblivious however, your sensei better prepare himself though, because I will win in our rematch. Guy shouted at the end, giving his traditional nice guy pose. Sakura covered her mouth and her face unconsciously shook rapidly. Guy didn't seem to notice that he had a bit of garbage stuck between his usually metallic-like shining teeth. Bleh. That is repulsive. I got to go, sorry Guy-sensei I have a mission that I am leaving for soon. And at that she turned her head and almost got into a jog, desperately trying to flush that horrid image out of her mind. Good luck on your mission. May your youth shine your way till the end. Guy beamed. When the sight of Guy's teeth finally flushed from her mind, she returned to her previous thoughts, I wonder how long it has been since Naruto has eaten ramen. Knowing him and his endless bickering he gave up on missions. I would say he would downright refuse to eat other ramen other than the store that only makes real ramen as he used to put it. Sakura could not resist a silent chuckle. Seeing the familiar small box store with its fire-red kanji was all she needed to know she was at Ichiraku's. Now, what was it he said in his constant praises of this place? Oh yes, miso pork was the ramen of ramen. Sakura mused, well now for the first time today, finally felt the long overdue joy of seeing her teammate again. Chapter 9 Team prepares Konoha's lazy genius. Shikamaru found that he had most of the items he needed on his person already from the meeting. He already had his Shunin vest on, all his kunai holsters were full, he had his special equipment which included explosive notes and flare bombs which were used to help his shadow techniques if necessary. Shikamaru also had a folded up map of the fire country that he kept in his weapons pouch at all times. When he got home and smoothly dodged his troublesome mother, he began packing 3 changes of outfitting in total, only variation being the color of each outfit changed from black to dark blue, then forest green. Colors that Shikamaru found were perfect for blending in with the natural environment that was around most of the fire country. However, his mother, and to an extent Ino, scolded him every time when he wore complete green, as his vest was green as well, and made him look like some sort of walking bush, or worse, a wannabe Guy or Lee. Since ignoring them was becoming too troublesome, Shikamaru, against his free will, had to order a custom vest that was black, which he only wore when he combined it with any form of green dressing. As long as it keeps those troublesome women off my back, so be it. Since carrying around an extra vest was a little impractical, he had to purchase a sealing scroll, which to his further dismay, was worth a C-rank mission's entire pay to purchase the single scroll. The sealing master assured him that he could fit up to 10 items in the scroll, as long as their physical size was no bigger than 5 feet in height and width. The scroll, however, could not seal living objects. That model was worth an A-rank pay. Shikamaru did admit though that the scroll did have its uses for long-term missions and was even willing to go as far as seal his entire backpack within it and simply clip the 1.5-foot tall scroll to his belt. Actually, screw it. He sealed his backpack into the scroll. Using his shadow, Shikamaru slid his shadow downstairs and opened the fridge door, grabbing some fruits, his water canteen, and a plastic-sealed meal of remaining chicken from dinner last night. Once he successfully brought the foods back to his room, he too sealed them into the scroll, leaving 2 slots remaining. I see you are now unlocking the full potential of the shadow techniques now, Shikamaru, said a sarcastic yet familiar voice that belonged to the one and only Narashikaku. Indeed, maybe with extra training I can use it to wash the dishes as well while I sleep or am watching the clouds outside. Shikamaru added, feigning being proud for his extra use of his talents. Yes. And I suppose this legendary S-ranked is titled Kage Satsuki no. Shikamaru couldn't hold back the chuckle to that. Shadow chore technique. I like it, good work dad. Shikaku decided to end their little game there, your sensei is waiting outside for you. Shikamaru turned and blinked a few times in confusion at his father. Why didn't you invite Asuma-sensei then? Shikamaru grumbled. Sarutobi Asuma waited outside the Nara household. Asuma simply wanted to wish Shikamaru good luck on his mission, like he did for all of his former students before they left. When Asuma noticed the front door was starting to open, he naturally assumed it was Shikamaru, seeing as he asked his father to flush the lazy genius out of hiding. About time Shikamaru. Asuma looked dumbfounded when he found nothing standing in the now fully open front door. It wasn't until he noticed a dark shape appearing to form right by the door did his eyes narrow. Don't tell me. He has gotten this lazy. He said to no one in particular. When the shape formed into a hand and gave the gesture to come in, Asuma could not believe his eyes at all. Asuma did as he was instructed and came in shaking his head and muttering something about lazy ass brat, although the constant shaking of his entire body from his laughter betrayed what he was saying. Nice trick, don't you think, Asuma-sensei? Said Shikamaru, who was sitting comfortably at the kitchen table, looking at his map. I must admit it is quite clever, though it does go to show how lazy you are really becoming. Asuma said, still lightly chuckling. Shikamaru smirked. Remind me to try it out on people more often, your initial reaction was priceless. At this Asuma was at a loss, and he turned his head in the general direction of the front door to check if his memory was serving him right. When he confirmed his suspicions were correct he turned back to his former student. Shikamaru. How did you see me from here? I don't see a window that has a decent view of the front door. Shikamaru gave off a lazy and partly drowsy sigh and then responded, my father has been teaching me how to use my shadow to give me foresight. While I cannot see both normally and through my shadow at the same time, I can temporarily see objects and movement in my shadow. It is not the same as normal sight however, to be honest it's more like a surrounding darkness and motion of any kind draws a kind of bright light. Asuma's eyes were wide and his mouth agape enough that his cigarette dropped out of his mouth. By the way, Asuma-sensei, I've told you many times that my mother doesn't allow smoking in our house. It's not lit. Asuma staggered as he struggled to pick up his cigarette, still clearly in shock. Shikamaru snickered. Is it honestly that hard to imagine me doing training of any kind? Asuma was slowly recovering but managed to say, do you really want me to answer that question, Shikamaru? Shikamaru sighed again and muttered as usual how troublesome. By now Asuma had recovered. That must have taken a long time to learn, the shadow techniques of the Nara clan are indeed amazing. Shikamaru by now started placing markers on his map but continued the conversation. It's a technique Dad has been trying to teach me ever since I got promoted to, at first I honestly thought it was too troublesome and showed no interest in it. Shikamaru briefly paused, showing some signs of hesitation, but continued anyway. After the incident with trying to bring back Sasuke, it no longer became so troublesome. Asuma knew how his student was mentally when he found out about his other teammate, not to mention his best friend's condition when the mission was reported as a failure. Shikamaru. Asuma started but was silenced by a dismissive wave from the shadow user. Bringing back the past is too troublesome. I've moved on to Asuma-sensei. Shikamaru stated, giving his sensei a convincing smirk, which Asuma obliged to with his own smirk. Shikamaru continued, the jutsu is classed as A-ranked and surprisingly doesn't require large amounts of chakra to keep active. The main problem I have found though is that my so-called eyes can only be in one part of the shadow at one time, so it's not as if I can see everything that my shadow stretches to all at once. It is called Mitsuki or darkness eyes. It is only usable by wielders of the dark and light chakra, which are the required elements for a shadow to form after all. Asuma nodded while taking a seat opposite of his former student, so basically, it's exclusive to the Nara clan. Like all your jutsus are. Shikamaru shrugged, more or less. Shikamaru had a quick glance outside at the sun to determine the time, since getting up to look at the clock in the other room was too troublesome. Forgive me Asuma-sensei, but I will have to go and meet up with the team soon. Asuma nodded again in understanding. May I have a quick rundown of your mission then? Shikamaru enjoyed giving brief rundowns of his missions. He found it less troublesome and seemingly was an expert at shortening a potential hour story into a couple of sentences. Protection mission in Wave Country, the threat, an evil organization that bullies their way to earn their livings, B-ranked, but can be potentially a higher or lower rank depending on possible shinobi presence. Team members consist of me, Rock Lee, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto. Asuma's interest spiked at the mention of a certain blonde-haired shinobi. Shikamaru answered Asuma's question before he could ask. Naruto will be meeting us at Wave. Jiraiya-sama has some sort of important task to do and doesn't want Naruto around for it, so he requested Hokage-sama add him as a mandatory team member for the mission. Asuma lipped out a voiceless "oh," then spoke again while scratching his short beard. It seems to me this mission could either be a walk in the park or potentially bad. Shikamaru gave his acknowledgement with a yawn before speaking. The team originally was without Sakura, but I persuaded Tsunade-sama to add her. This mission has too many variables to risk the exclusion of a medic nin. Asuma grunted in agreement. I heard Lee got promoted too, at least that is what Guy is singing, while adding statements about the boy's youth. Shikamaru nodded, rolling his eyes at the part about Lee's arguably crazy sensei, and Asuma continued. I saw his match at the last exam. The boy indeed has come a long way. It is amazing that he has come so far with only Taijutsu. Shikamaru couldn't help but sigh. At first I thought he was exactly a copy of his sensei, but while waiting for a so-called 10 minutes for Hokage-sama to get Sakura, I got to know him a little. He seems slightly calmer in comparison to Guy-sensei, and he seems to think quickly and logically when he wants to. But then sometimes he basically acts like something akin to Naruto's and Guy-sensei's attitudes. Asuma watched and listened to his students' analyses, trying his hardest to suppress a grin at his former students' antics. My main problem with this mission, Asuma-sensei, is, excluding a single mission with Sakura to treat sick villagers, I am not familiar with any of my team members' abilities whatsoever. While that one mission accounts for Sakura's vast knowledge in medicine, I don't have any real knowledge at all of her fighting style, other than rumors of what a few people refer to as monster strength similar to Hokage-sama. Asuma gulped and then replied, maybe if you visited Training Ground 7 after her spars with Kakashi or training with Tsunade-sama, you would see what this monster strength is capable of. Shikamaru brushed it off with muttering his typical too troublesome and moved on to his next team member. Lee, I never have seen him fight after the battle with Gaara almost 3 years ago, and I was away on a mission to Suna during the last exam and didn't get to see his fight. Assuming what you have said about him earlier though is true, he must have improved even more from that battle. Yet I don't know any he can perform, considering he cannot form seals and has to mold chakra through Taijutsu. I assume his abilities are as unique as mine in some way. Taking a brief pause to accumulate his thoughts, Shikamaru finally began on the last team member of his group. Naruto by far is the most mysterious one out of all of them. I don't know if his personality has changed, if he has become more tactful, if he still wears that bullseye orange jumpsuit, and what his jutsus are at all. I stopped trying to think with logic and Naruto in the same sentence the moment I saw him perform Kage Bunshin. Just when I thought I had the guy worked out, his second was a technique only 2 people in the world could and still can perform. Shikamaru released a sigh. You know Shikamaru, your team members are in the same boat as you are about yourself as well as the other members, Asuma stated dryly. Shikamaru blinked a few times before muttering troublesome then looking at his former sensei. You're right Asuma-sensei, I guess before we get the mission officially underway, I am going to have our team spar one another in some way. Coordination is vital in teamwork and it is next to impossible to achieve that if we don't know each other's capabilities or limits. Asuma nodded, proud at his former student's proposed solution. Asuma looked out at the sun, you better get going Shikamaru, you haven't even packed yet and you're going to be Asuma stopped speaking and narrowed his eyes at a summoning scroll that Shikamaru pointed to that was attached to his belt. Asuma spoke in a monotone voice. Don't tell me you just sealed all your equipment in that. Chapter 10 Heading Out. After bidding goodbye to her mother, Sakura closed the door to her home and began her run towards the gate. Waiting for Naruto's little surprise to get cooked and secured in her sealing scroll took longer than anticipated and she was a little late. Sakura didn't pack too much, just a few changes of outfits, some food, and a medical book she had been studying for a while to read in her free time. Her kunai holster was packed and her medical sealing scroll was filled with all the equipment she deemed necessary. It wasn't long until the grand front gates of Konoha were in her sight and she caught a glimpse at Shikamaru. He was missing his backpack, lying down on his back in the middle of the pathway, looking up at the clouds. Sakura couldn't help but shake her head at the lazy genius's antics. Hello, Shikamaru. Where is your backpack? Without giving any recognition to Sakura's presence, Shikamaru proudly pointed to the sealing scroll clipped to his side. Sakura's eyes narrowed as she frowned. There is a reason we do not seal everything in one scroll, you know that, right? She said, her voice dripping in sarcasm. Shikamaru finally acknowledged her presence with a smirk and met her eye to eye. But carrying around a heavy bag is such a hassle. He said sheepishly. Sakura chose to forget about it and sighed. Has Lee-san arrived yet? Shikamaru pointed his finger behind her, she in turn followed its direction and saw a small air or dust rising to the sky. Sakura noticed it appeared like some kind of trail. And the trail was leading towards their position. Within seconds the cause of the dust was sprinting right towards them, then came to an abrupt stop in front of them. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, I got lost on the road in life. Sakura turned wide-eyed and confused at Shikamaru's statement. When did he of all people know about Kakashi-sensei's excuses? Lee tried again. No, I saw a black cat and had to take an alternate route. Shikamaru? Barked an agitated Sakura. When did Shikamaru of all people enjoy endless teasing? Sakura thought, glaring daggers at the lazy shadow user on the ground. Lee tried for a third time. Sorry. I was trying to find Guy-sensei and say goodbye before going, but I unfortunately couldn't find him anywhere. Somebody said something about him going to see a dentist for a cleaning. Lee shrugged, with a clearly confused expression on his face. Sakura cringed at the thought but quickly shook it off and waved her hand dismissively. No worries, Lee-san, I only just got here as well. Oh. I see. Lee said when he remembered something and dropped his pack and unzipped his bag. That's right, Sakura-san, I have something for you. Sakura's eyebrows rose in question. She let out a small gasp when she was presented with a set of expensive weights. Lee-san, I can't accept those, there. Sakura honestly didn't have time to look around in equipment stores often. But she knew a pair of chakra adjustable weights when she saw them. She was silenced by a toothy grin from Lee. Sakura-san, I cannot use these at all. As I'm sure you understand why. Really, it's more than fine by me if you or anybody uses them. Sakura hesitated while looking hard at the weights. I'll pay for them when we get back to Konoha. I know roughly how much they are worth. Thank you, Lee-san. She said, giving a soft grateful smile and then quickly changing to a concentrated expression. How do they work, Lee-san? Lee began while handing one over to Sakura. They're pretty straightforward, they are worn similar to a brace. He demonstrated with his own wrist while Sakura followed. When they are secure, you will hear a click, meaning they have locked. By clockwork, 2 clicks were heard from both of the weights. To release them they have a simple lock here. Lee spun around his arm, showing a clear button. Lee pressed it and a release click was heard as the weight then hung loosely from Lee's arm as he handed the other over to Sakura, who locked it in on her other wrist. Lee nodded in approval. Now to change how much they weigh, you perform a sheep seal for increasing the weight or a tiger seal for decreasing. Sakura followed as instructed by forming a sheep seal. Lee nodded again. Now place a free palm on the weight you want to adjust and mold chakra in that hand. The weight increases at a steady pace and it will mark on the seal paper of the amount it weighs in pounds. However, they decrease instantly in case of an emergency situation. Sakura nodded and then asked, what is a good starting size that you recommend? Lee remembered back when he started using weights with Guy and then looked back at Sakura. For starting, I would try between 6 to 10 pounds on either arms or feet and increase it at your own pace in 1 to 2 pound intervals. Sakura nodded, then molded chakra in her hand, then repeated the same seal and molded chakra in the other weight. Sakura had settled for 8 pounds. She took 2 steps back from Lee and tried lifting her arms. Then she tried a quick punch or two at thin air. Lastly, she ran through the seal set for Kawarimi no, noticing that indeed her speed had slowed with her seal forming. Do they hurt? Lee asked. Sakura shook her head. No, well, I do feel their weight, it doesn't hurt. How long do I wear them for? Lee nodded and then decided to say a slightly altered version of what Guy told him when he asked the same question. It is best to wear them for as long as possible. If you find that they begin to hurt within an hour of use, decrease their amount. I would recommend that you wear them during missions as well, but only you can decide when you think it is appropriate to release them. While it is good to train with them, it is not worth it when your own life or a teammate's life is at risk. Sakura reassessed all the information she was told by Lee, finally nodding. "Hi, I understand, thank you again, Lee-san, and like I said, I owe you when we return." Lee nodded, although he probably wasn't going to accept the money anyway, since technically he hadn't purchased them in the first place, and Team Guy had long forgotten about them after their hiccup. Sakura then remembered something. "You said on arms or feet earlier." She asked for elaboration, which Lee responded with a sharp nod. "Hi, they can be used on either wrists or above the ankles. Unfortunately I only have that single pair, so I would suggest alternating between feet and arms each day until we return." Sakura again nodded, paying a quick glance at her current choice of combat sandals. "Lucky I packed a pair of normal sandals as well," she mused. Sakura recalled the noticeable speed difference Lee made when he removed his weights and chuckled internally. "Kakashi-sensei will be in for a pleasant surprise the next time we spar." It was then that Shikamaru chose to butt in. "Alright guys, gathered around." He ushered lazily, kneeling down and unfolding his map on the ground. Sakura and Lee kneeled down as well. "Okay, before we head to our destination, can I just get a look at what equipment you are bringing? Just what is in your weapon pouches is fine." All three presented their weapon pouches and opened them. Shikamaru gave a quick glance at Lee's other two weapons clipped to his belt and took note of them before giving a firm nod that he was satisfied. "Sakura, do you still remember what path your team took originally to get to Wave?" Sakura nodded. "Hi." She then showed the path Team 7 originally took on the map. Shikamaru nodded when his suspicion was confirmed. "Since we aren't escorting a civilian this time, we can save time by cutting through the forest here." He pointed at one of his markings on the map. "I estimate it will be nightfall by the time we pass through and reach here." He motioned towards his next marking that wasn't far from the first. "That is where we will rest, taking rotations for the night, and then we will move out by sunrise." Shikamaru paused briefly before continuing. "As long as we don't run into anything troublesome, I predict we will reach the start of the bridge by early morning." Shikamaru looked up at his other two teammates and noticed Sakura had a questioning gaze when she spoke. "It didn't take long to get to Wave, we could travel through the night and arrive before dawn." Shikamaru had already taken this into consideration. "I am going with a worst-case assumption that Waves or possibly even ourselves will be attacked before or during our arrival. We wouldn't be in top condition if we didn't stop and rest during the night." Sakura admitted defeat with a stern nod. "We best get moving then. Lee, you're the strongest in the group, so you're in the front. I'll be in the middle to give instructions to both of you, and Sakura, you will remain in the back and focus on detecting any foreign chakra signatures. Let's keep it one branch space between us as we move through the forest as well." Shikamaru yawned as he folded his well-used map up and slid it back in his weapon pouch and proceeded walking through the giant-sized gates. Lee looked confused for a moment and was about to question Shikamaru about something until Sakura answered his question. "His backpack and other supplies are sealed in that scroll. If that's what you're going to ask Lee-san," she said dryly, still showing her disapproval of Shikamaru's actions. "Oh. How hip." Chapter 11. Back to Wave. The group was nearing their destination. Shikamaru was relieved that the entire journey went without incident. The sea of leaves from the towering trees, however, were surrounding the group and obscuring their vision of how close they truly were. Until Lee made his next jump and was blinded by the bright light of the sun, however he quickly adjusted and landed on the ground in front of him gracefully. Shikamaru and Sakura followed. Once the team's eyes had adjusted from the sudden change of brightness, they looked at the sight before them. There was the entrance to the bridge. Behind the bridge was an amazing view of the entire Wave country. It was safe to say the country had taken a 180 on their state of finance, as there were new things added to the bridge that Sakura didn't recall from before. On each side of the bridge there were large bronze-shaded dogs wearing Konoha forehead protectors. The dogs were standing on their hind legs, and in one paw, the dogs held a fan resembling the Uchiha insignia. Judging by how the group could see their own reflections distorted on the towering canines, it was easy to tell they were polished thoroughly weekly, maybe even daily. What was behind the dogs made Sakura smile, a tall sakura tree full of vibrant pink petals. "So the dog is Kakashi-sensei, the fan is Sasuke-kun, and the tree is me. So where's it?" It was then that her eyes finally read the sign above the top of the entrance that was titled in gold-plated letters, "The Great Naruto Bridge." It was then that Sakura's smile widened and she chuckled, shaking her head. "You deserve it, you baka." Shikamaru whistled in awe. "Wow, you guys must really be famous here, hell, they even named the bridge after the knucklehead." Sakura hadn't taken her eyes off the sign, still smiling. She never voiced her agreement aloud. Speaking of Naruto-kun, where is he? Isn't he supposed to be meeting us here? Lee asked, eager to see his rival and friend again. This isn't here. Said an aged yet familiar masculine voice coming from the side of the group. There, leaning against a tree before them, was none other than the legendary Jiraiya. He didn't seem to change much in appearance from the day he and Naruto left Konoha. His near impossibly clean white spiky hair may have grown a bit, but otherwise he was practically the same. Jiraiya had noticed Sakura still had a grin on her face, you know that he still complained that he didn't get a symbol of his own. Sakura frowned, yet quickly reformed the grin on her features. Somehow, that doesn't seem to surprise me at all, Jiraiya-sama. Do you know where Naruto has gone? Shikamaru asked, finding this reunion too troublesome and wanted to proceed with the mission. Lee was nodding furiously in agreement to Shikamaru's question. Jiraiya pouted, at least one of them still shows me some respect. However, he quickly recovered and pointed his thumb across the bridge. He said he wanted to say goodbye to some brat called Inari, or something like that. You will most probably find him somewhere over there. Jiraiya said, with a hint of annoyance in his tone. With that said, Lee beamed out. Thank you, Jiraiya-sama. HAWWW. Naruto-kun, here I come, prepare yourself. He shouted out loud almost as if he was expecting Naruto to hear his claim and took off across the bridge before the others could say anything, leaving behind the all too familiar dust trail. Shikamaru and Sakura shook their heads while Shikamaru muttered, I blame Guy-sensei for this. So troublesome. Sakura grunted in agreement. Jiraiya's sweat dropped. Wow. That's some speed. Will you be coming with us, Jiraiya-sama? Shikamaru asked, almost as if no. He didn't care what just happened. Jiraiya took a moment to recover, but eventually replied, unfortunately no, this is where I must head off and carry out my business. But if you don't mind, I need to borrow your medic for a second. The teens raised their eyebrows in question at this. Jiraiya smiled sadly and said, clearly being overly dramatic, this old body isn't what it used to be. I've injured my back while trying to keep that settled down. He emphasized this by rubbing his lower back with his arm. Sakura nodded, although her questioning gaze remained, I'll take a look at it, then Jiraiya-sama. Go on without me, Shikamaru, I'll catch up with you and Lee-san later. She turned to find Shikamaru was already starting his trek across the long bridge already. Without looking back, he lazily flung his hand over his head as if it was too hard to wave and said through a yawn, no problem, we will see you later then. Sakura's right eye began to twitch as she grinded through her gritted teeth, Shikamaru. Sighing, she turned her attention back to Jiraiya, noticing that his expression was different from earlier. It seemed as if he was preparing himself for something that he knew was going to be long, complicated, and potentially dangerous. Sakura soon figured out just from that look that Jiraiya's back was perfectly fine, he was just looking for an excuse to talk to her about something. Classified. Chapter 12, New Recognition. Sakura sighed and decided to speak first, Tsunade-sama told you that I know about Naruto's situation, didn't she? Jiraiya was caught off guard with that one, and his eyes widened slightly, but soon changed back to normal, and he smirked. Very perceptive. Yes, before you guys got here, Tsunade sent a message back using one of her messenger slugs and updated me on your understanding of Naruto. Jiraiya unconsciously scratched the back of his head. Nonetheless, that makes things a little easier. There has been a little bit of a setback to the original planned schedule for my searching. Sakura blinked a few times and started worrying. Before she would start overreacting though, Jiraiya eased her concern. It's nothing major, it's just that I have been informed of another outpost being spotted, which I will be traveling to as well, meaning I will not return for an additional week, maybe even 2. He heard Sakura's relieved sigh and then decided to add. You don't need to worry about the Akatsuki making a move on him for more than half a year at least, and to my understanding they require the Kyuubi to be extracted last for some reason. So Naruto is perfectly safe. Sakura frowned, yes I know Jiraiya-sama. But that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to worry about what will happen to Naruto. Sakura said, getting quickly agitated. She really has created a miniature pink-haired version of herself, Naruto better watch out, something tells me her temper isn't the only inherited trait she learned from you, Tsunade. Jiraiya mused. Sensing danger though if he didn't tread lightly, Jiraiya quickly apologized and continued. I am truly glad you know about all this though. Sakura was taken aback by that, and Jiraiya shook his head, deciding to voice his hopeless attempts for the entire time of their training. I tried getting the Gaki to tell you guys about the Kyuubi all the way back from when you entered the exams. Being the typical stubborn brat he is, he refused to tell anybody. I'm sure you have come to your own reasons as to why. Sakura nodded and broke her gaze with the Toad Sage, she had already known about him before from her talk with Tsunade. He thought we would treat him like all the villagers treat him, he was afraid of what would happen if we knew. And he wanted to protect us. Sakura unconsciously clenched her hand into a tight fist. Well, she hit the nail right on the head with that one. Jiraiya thought, feeling similar traces of annoyance towards his student. While I cannot speak for Sasuke-kun, I myself would never see Naruto as a monster. I may hit him, I may constantly scold him, I may even insult him. Sakura honestly had no idea why her face was suddenly damp, but refused to break down at that point and continued in more of a half shout. But calling him a monster is the last thing I would ever accuse him of being. Monsters do not care for others, monsters do not help people that treat them like crap, and monsters enjoy hurting people. If anything, the villagers that show hate to him fit more in the category of monster before I would even consider Naruto as anything else other than who he truly is, and that is Uzumaki Naruto. Sakura sniffled and rubbed her sore eyes. She then felt a comforting hand placed on her shoulder and looked up to see a Jiraiya giving a warm smile, and that is why I always pressure the fool to trust his friends. Sakura finally gave a soft smile while murmuring a silent thank you. Jiraiya let out a sigh and looked at the girl in pity. While he did not want to dump more responsibility on the girl's shoulders, he knew that he didn't really have any other option. He waited until Sakura appeared more calm before he spoke again. Unfortunately, I have more information to tell you. He ignored Sakura's surprised gasp and walked over to a public bench and gestured to her to follow. This conversation was probably going to last a while. More information, what else is there that I don't know? Sakura mused while following his prompt to sit next to him as he began. As you know, he stopped talking when he noticed Sakura tense and heard the wood of the cedar hand was gripping, give a loud crack, sending chips of wood flying around in a blur. Please Jiraiya-sama, don't use that word. Please. Sakura said above a whisper, staring at the ground. Sorry. As you know, people with tenants are linked via their chakra coils and depending on the complexity of their seals. From your experience with Gaara and his Bijuu tenant, the Shukaku, you can understand that the person can use specific abilities granted to them from the Bijuu sealed within them. Sakura winced at the memory of the once crazed Gaara and his strange abilities, such as the control of sand and his transformation. She nodded. Jiraiya thought his words through carefully and continued, Naruto as well as granted abilities from his tenant, some you are familiar with, such as amazing stamina and faster healing compared to others. Those are not the only abilities he is granted, however. Did you ever notice a time where there was red chakra surrounding Naruto? Sakura didn't need to think long to recall a time, as she had over a year to ponder with herself about the mystery between Naruto and the Kyuubi. She was able to put certain things together, yes, during the exam in Naruto's match against Hyuga Neji. I honestly lost all hope for Naruto's victory when Neji had sealed all of his Tenketsu. Only now do I understand just how impossible it was for him to stand back up from such a severe injury. The wound should have even killed him if it wasn't for the Kyuubi. Realizing she was trailing off, she quickly got back to the question. Soon after though, Naruto called forth red chakra. I heard many people in the crowd around me sort of start to panic until they heard Naruto talk and give his traditional smile. The chakra though. It felt so evil. That was the Kyuubi's chakra Naruto called upon at that time, wasn't it? Jiraiya was astounded at the amount of knowledge Sakura knew so far, even though she was left in the dark for so long. I see you really have had a lot of time to give this thought. Sakura shrugged, I respected the fact that Naruto wanted to keep it quiet, so I haven't been able to discuss it with anybody until yesterday. Jiraiya nodded his head in understanding and then continued, yes, that is correct, Naruto can call upon the Kyuubi's chakra at his own will. There is however, a slight complication with that. Sakura's eyes widened and had a look of concern again. Jiraiya didn't want to leave her in suspense and continued. Abondoned designed the seal so that over time, Naruto is granted more access to the Kyuubi's chakra. In doing so, the Kyuubi slowly weakens over time until it will reach a point where the Kyuubi will disappear forever, leaving nothing but a very large addition to Naruto's chakra pool. The problem with that is there is a bit of an unwanted side effect with that. Sometimes the chakra can be called out without his will. When this happens, he gains animalistic features such as sharpened nails, more defined whiskers, and most noticeably the bright red eyes of the Kyuubi. When in this form, Naruto is granted enhanced strength, quicker regeneration, but originally had the attitude of a berserker. Sakura's sudden gasp caused Jiraiya to wait, that explains the time. During our time in the exams, when Orochimaru came to mark Sasuke-kun with the cursed seal. Jiraiya frowned, but didn't interrupt her recollecting thoughts. Naruto went berserk when Sasuke-kun attempted to hand over our scroll in a desperate attempt to save us. He started attacking Orochimaru like crazy, but he was so strong. So strong that he was knocking a giant snake summon off balance and even was able to hold it back from attempting to attack us. Kyuubi made him do that. Jiraiya nodded to the gaping and shocked girl. I have discovered that Naruto unconsciously draws out the Kyuubi's chakra against his will when he gets extremely angry, probably some link formed with the Kyuubi's personality. I'm honestly not sure why. Fortunately, he is still completely himself and is more in control and calmer now when that form happens. Sakura released the very long breath she was holding in relief. But raised an eyebrow when Jiraiya sighed, sounding somewhat disappointed. I honestly wish to say that is all, now go see the Gaki, but I'm sorry, that isn't the only limit of that state. Sakura's body stiffened, but she urged Jiraiya to continue, as Naruto's temper rises, the Kyuubi can flow more chakra throughout Naruto. It eventually becomes so much that it gets to a point where the red chakra becomes visible to the ordinary eye and a red layer of chakra forms around Naruto's body. The chakra acts independent of Naruto's body and the chakra shapes itself in the form of a miniature Kyuubi with the inclusion of a chakra tail that appears behind Naruto. Quickly seeing if Sakura was still with him, he tried to cheer the now very inanimate girl up. The good news though is Naruto is still completely in control in this state and can easily remain calm. He was confused though when Sakura's body language didn't change however. That's the second time you have said still in control. Please tell me it doesn't get worse. She whispered, no, begged Jiraiya. Jiraiya inwardly cursed himself for his poor choice of words, I am truly sorry Sakura. But now it gets worse. Jiraiya honestly felt like taking on all of Akatsuki and Orochimaru when he saw the already shocked girl begin to silently cry, with no trace of emotion on her face, forgive me, I don't even know why I'm crying, continue, please. Jiraiya knew that if he kept going at this rate, he would have to explain to Tsunade why her apprentice experienced a nervous breakdown and had to return to Konoha, so he chose to smoothen out the razor-sharp edges for the already bleeding to death girl. More tails grow over time as Naruto temper increases even more, each time a new tail is formed, the more control the Kyuubi gets over Naruto. While willpower helps with the second tail, it cannot hold the Kyuubi back for long when the third tail is formed and Naruto has trouble distinguishing friend from foe. Jiraiya had to think very hard about what words to use for the last form after the fourth tail was formed. The boy that we all have come to know as Uzumaki Naruto loses control completely. Naruto goes unconscious. And all that remains is the Kyuubi. If there was a word that could describe Haruno Sakura at this point, the most fitting term was the living dead. The girl's glassy eyes were fixed to the ground. She was not moving the slightest muscle, she could honestly compete with the statues to their right. The only signs of any motion were the slow streams of tears running down her soft pale skin and dripping down onto the turning muddy ground. Jiraiya looked at her with complete concern, internally cursing himself endlessly for how much he screwed up with filling her in. He secretly thanked God when he heard her sniffle to show she was still sane. Sakura croaked but tried again. Ever since I joined Team 7. I felt completely useless after our first real mission. When Sasuke-kun left and Naruto tried to bring him back, promising me. I never felt so pathetic and useless in my life. It was the main reason I went to Tsunade Sama to beg and become her apprentice. So I no longer just watch their backs and be able to help them. She shook her head rapidly, remembering the sudden dark secret she had stumbled into, but and now I see that even after all this time. I see can do nothing but cry. I can't help him with this. I am still useless. Jiraiya couldn't take it anymore and knew that he wasn't going to screw up this time or he would never, ever write an Icha book again. You are the only person right now that can help him. Jiraiya spoke loud, giving a warm smile to the girl that slowly turned her head to meet his firm gaze. I'm the only person who can help Naruto. Sakura whispered, her emerald orbs showing an emotion Jiraiya was thankful for seeing. Hope. That's right. Naruto no longer is alone amongst his friends, what truly matters to Naruto more than ever are your feelings towards him and accepting him for who he is. Until he finally sees that people will accept him regardless of his burden, you are his only hope for seeing the truth to not be afraid. Jiraiya noticed life returning in Sakura's face as her eyes were narrowing and gleaming like fire in understanding and determination, and you can help Naruto as well with his problem with the Kyuubi and Akatsuki, regardless of what you truly believe. He reached into his coat and pulled out several tags with the writing suppress labeled in firm black on it. These are sealed tags I have made that suppress Bijuu chakra instantly when placed on a target. Well, Naruto doesn't require these with the first tail and in most cases, the second tail. The third tail. And above will require these tags to be used. They will knock the wind out of him, but it is much better than the alternative. Carefully place one on his forehead and Kyuubi's influence over Naruto will vanish. Sakura looked hard at the thin pieces of paper that were going to allow her to help Naruto. She reached for them, held them firm in her hand and then placed them into her weapons pouch. Unconsciously she reached for her canteen afterwards and drank several mouths full of water to soothe her dry throat. She then poured some of the cool, soothing liquid into her free palm and splashed it on her face, helping remove the grogginess feeling. She then reached for her long discarded backpack sitting next to her and unzipped the front compartment where she kept a small face washer and dried herself off. Normally Jiraiya would be furiously jotting down in his notepad for his research as he watched Sakura recompose herself, but decided it was for the very best not to, giving a quick glance at the seat she partly damaged earlier on reflex, he couldn't help but wince. Yep. She is a miniature version of Tsunade. Naruto, I hope to God you don't piss this Kunoichi off, or you may encounter something worse to fear other than the Akatsuki. The wrath of one very angry woman. He was brought out of his thoughts by Sakura's surprisingly strong and confident voice. What would you do now, Jiraiya-sama? Jiraiya stood up and stretched, emitting a loud and hollow crack from his neck and back. I will be heading off to this outpost that was found near the border town in the Fire Country, then once that has been investigated, I'll move on to the next one that is in the Lightning Country. He groaned at the long journey ahead of him. Sakura remained seated and bowed her head deep in thought. Looking ahead at her own new task and responsibility set before her. She then looked up at Jiraiya with a strong gaze full of determination. You have my word Jiraiya-sama, I will look after Naruto. Jiraiya smirked and chuckled as he began walking towards the forest their team came from earlier. I don't doubt you will. Now you best catch up with your group before they start gathering suspicions. Jiraiya hinted suggestively. Sakura had no clue what Jiraiya was implying with that, but decided to ignore it. Good luck with your journey, Jiraiya-sama. He waved dismissively, then disappeared into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind Sakura. She decided to sit on the bench for a few moments longer until she picked up her pack and began her walk along the quiet bridge, more eager to meet her teammate more than ever. Chapter 13 Team United. That must be a very severe back injury. Yeah right. This is the second time something involving Sakura has resulted in her arrival being late. Back in our mission she treated a person's back within not even 2 minutes. Yet it has been 30 odd minutes, it took me roughly 10 minutes to drag myself across that bridge, so something's amiss. Shikamaru broke from his thoughts when he saw his spandex-wearing teammate successfully complete his 8th lap around the village, and he sighed. Yet it took this freak not even a minute to cross the bridge. And where is Naruto? Surely the knucklehead saw or heard the commotion this guy is making, the entire town sure has. So troublesome. I feel your overwhelming aura of youth Naruto-kun. Shikamaru heard Lee proclaim somewhere in the town. Shikamaru released a sigh and leaned back onto the surprisingly comfortable dog statue on the side of the bridge exit. Unlike his partially crazy teammate, he found it too much of a hassle to search the entire town for their missing blonde team member. And he most certainly wasn't going to be shouting out his name while proclaiming his vibrant display of youth to the entire world. A light chuckle was heard, somehow, this doesn't surprise me one bit that I would find you here like this Shikamaru. Came a proud and familiar voice. Shikamaru only opened his left eye to greet his guest, but quickly opened both and went slightly agape. If it wasn't for his fox-bearing smile, he would have mistaken Uzumaki Naruto for somebody else. Shikamaru immediately noticed that he had grown astronomically considering how short he was before he left. Naruto was now roughly the same height as Shikamaru. His golden blonde hair had grown slightly all around and on the side of his face. His forehead protector now was black instead of blue and appeared extra long as Shikamaru noticed the long end straps flowing freely behind Naruto's back in the cool breeze. Naruto's face hadn't changed much except for what comes in age, his lively blue eyes hinted he still was his hyperactive and mischief-old self. It seemed he still had it in for orange as he was wearing a modified version of his traditional orange jumpsuit. There were now fine shades of black on the top part of his jacket, but he still stuck out like a sore thumb out in the open. Naruto chuckled again at Shikamaru's surprised expression. Good to see you too, Shikamaru. Shikamaru quickly collected himself, stood up and sighed. Indeed, long time no see Naruto, I see you have been keeping well the past 2 odd years. Naruto nodded and beamed, you bet, Iro-senin has been teaching me all sorts of awesome news since we left. At the rate I'm going I will be Hokage in no time. Shikamaru couldn't resist a smirk, that one sentence basically concluded most of his suspicions he had about his hyperactive comrade and friend, still your same old self I see. Shikamaru said in a conclusive and somehow relieved tone. Before Naruto could respond he had to quickly dodge to the right at an incoming missile foot which belonged to none other than an ecstatic Lee. HAWWWW. Your reactions and senses have improved greatly Naruto-kun. Lee beamed. Naruto almost fell over backwards before he shouted in return, what the hell fuzzy brows. Is that how you say hi to a longtime comrade? Lee gave a toothy grin and did his traditional nice guy pose. Of course, what other better way is there to have a grand reunion with one of your rivals than to have one with your fists in a youthful exploding epic spar? Shikamaru didn't even know why he felt he should educate the miniature guy otherwise. Gee, Lee, I don't know, but I hear talking to them works well. Maybe you should give that a try first before you try to decapitate another person's head again. Naruto had by then recovered from the attempted concussion by Lee and tilted his head to the side deep in thought. He then pointed his finger at Shikamaru, then Lee, then back to himself before resting his hand on his chin. Shikamaru snickered at the blonde's antics but answered his silent question. Yes, there are 3 of us coming from Konoha Genius. Our medic is apparently looking at Jiraiya's back for an injury he claims you gave him. He said, smoothly dodging mentioning who that medic was as he was silently scheming something to amuse himself with. Naruto gave a sheepish grin. Hey. It was his fault when he asked to have a spar on the top of an old building. It wasn't my fault that the roof collapsed on him when he did that ridiculous tap dance he does, claiming you are fighting the legendary Jiraiya. Heh, stupid Iro Sennin. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed from his suspicions earlier. So he did injure his back, but something like that wouldn't really injure a shinobi enough to require a medic's attention. Especially maybe I'm just overanalyzing the situation. Lee was about to ask Naruto if he wanted to engage in a spar until he noticed his blonde friend narrowing his eyes on something coming across the bridge. Lee in turn looked as well and smiled. I was beginning to wonder where Sakura-san had got to. Lee didn't notice the sudden gasp coming from his friend, but Shikamaru sure did. Sakura-chan, he questioned me excitedly. Before either could confirm, Naruto was already running and waving in the direction of his old teammate. Boy. Sakura-chan. Sakura looked up at the announcement of her name, with the added suffix she hadn't heard in a long time, and her eyes widened when she saw who the call had come from. Is that? Then Naruto, she yelled back and began walking faster until they came a few feet away from each other and met emerald to oceanic blue eyes. Shikamaru snickered at the pair's antics. Both of them had their mouths slightly hung open, staring in fascination at one another. Shikamaru heard a sniffle and raised an eyebrow and turned to see Lee rubbing his eyes. What a beautiful reunion. Shikamaru-kun, you without a doubt were correct. Last time I checked, talking didn't mean just calling out each other's names, then having a staring contest, you idiot. Shikamaru inwardly moaned, this mission is becoming more and more troublesome. And nothing has even happened yet. Sakura could not believe how just one glimpse of him could vaporize all that built-up anxiety and conflicting anger she had for him. Looking into his traditional fox-like smile. Finally recovered from her shock at his change, she spoke first surprisingly, a little nervous more than anything. It's great to see you again, Naruto. Naruto snapped out of his shock, then replied in his hyperactive tone that she missed hearing, while scratching the back of his head, it's great to see you again as well, Sakura-chan. Sakura had a rush of things she wanted to say to him, but she didn't even know where to start. Quickly remembering where she was, she stifled all her questions. There is time for that later. She reminded herself, it was then that she realized she wasn't looking down to meet his eyes anymore, she in fact was looking slightly above her head level. Why, you're taller than me, aren't you? Naruto was caught off guard by the question, but quickly recovered and brought his hand up to his head and roughly measured it with Sakura's and suddenly realized as well. Oh. I guess so. I didn't even notice. He said through a light chuckle. Sakura smiled softly, you really have grown. Naruto. To the teen's slight disappointment though, Lee and Shikamaru announced their presence, Naruto-kun. I am truly interested to see the results of your training. Naruto released his sigh and then turned and faced Lee, with what surprised the others was a serious expression written across his features. Lee, there is a time and place for us to have our little spar and rivalry. To say Sakura and Shikamaru were shocked was an understatement. Wow. He not only has grown in height but in maturity as well. Sakura mused, with a slight trace of disappointment. Naruto then clenched his fist and waved it in front of Lee, while his eyes burned with fire, you better prepare yourself, fuzzy brows. I am going to kick your spandex-wearing ass all the way back to Konoha when we do, Dadabeo. I thought it was too good to be true. Shikamaru mused, while voicing his displeasure with a groan. Baka. Sakura barked out, but what had surprised the others was her voice didn't sound annoyed at all, instead she was laughing. I really can't believe that after all I have heard he still acts this way. She shook her head after a moment when she suppressed it to slight giggles. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're still you, Naruto. I truly am. Naruto chuckled in return and scratched his head again, giving Sakura a genuine smile with his cheeks slightly pink-hued. Thanks Sakura-chan, I hope you haven't changed too much either. She's basically herself, but more violent than ever. Shikamaru answered for her, resulting in Sakura lifting a clenched fist and waving it at the shadow user. Her face was slightly flushed and her eyes were glaring daggers as she roared out, I am not Shikamaru. She inwardly cursed herself though as she just realized she had just proven Shikamaru's statement as correct and huffed and looked out towards the river. Shikamaru didn't want to waste any more time. Well, this is all nostalgic and everything, can we get a move on? Naruto, I was told by Tsunade-sama that you already have made contact with the client, what have they told you? Naruto straightened himself up and then spoke, giving Shikamaru his full attention. I spoke to Tsunade a couple of days ago. He told me that the town has been receiving numerous threats from Gato Team's old organization. Some through letters and passing by thugs. Their orders are pretty clear, destroy the bridge or else. I don't know everything that well, but from what I get, the organization has claimed ownership of the previous trade routes, but Wave here owns the quickest and less risky route in the Fire Country. So it's got to do with money. Like it was the first time. The group listened sharply to Naruto's story. What kind of threats are they making to Naruto? Naruto frowned at Sakura's question, but Tsunade told me they were more directed towards his family. But soon after they became threats to do with members of the town, which included kidnapping, murder. The latest threat was that they were going to destroy the entire town and blow the bridge up themselves. Naruto spat out. Relaxing, Naruto continued, the deadline they have set is in the next 3 days. At the current moment, thanks to Iro-Sennin taking care of a spy they had in the town, they do not know Wave has requested our help. At least we have the element of surprise on our hands. Did Jiraiya-sama find out any information about the group's new leader from the spy? Shikamaru asked. Naruto snickered, you mean this Oni team? No, Iro-Sennin couldn't figure out who he is, but he did have his guesses. The spy seemed to be just some hired goon that was in it for money if anything else, so we booted him out of Wave. He isn't coming back anytime soon. Shikamaru nodded and shared his suspicions with Naruto, who agreed with each one being equally possible. Lee had remained silent the entire time, but nonetheless was as focused as the other members of the team. So what's next? Lee inquired when the discussion seemed to be nearing the end. Shikamaru cleared his throat, you're going to get that sparring match you want, Lee. All three raised their eyebrows in question, how troublesome. Don't tell me I'm the only person here that doesn't know the other members very well. What do you mean? I know Sakura-chan and fuzzy brows, eh? He means our fighting styles, baka. Sakura interrupted Naruto, who sheepishly mumbled my bad and said nothing else. Yes, Sakura is correct, even though this is a temporary team for this mission, it is critical that as a team, we understand each other's abilities to be able to coordinate effectively. Knowing the team member personally helps, but it's not enough to help in a combat situation, Naruto. Naruto nodded in understanding, although he was still a bit puzzled. Shikamaru dismissed his frustration at the blonde and looked on the bright side. It's a work in progress. He figured and decided to set an example. Okay then Naruto, let's look at Sakura. Well, I know firsthand how skillful you are in medicine, I don't know anything at all about how you fight. I only have heard rumors about the remains of the training ground when you spar with Kakashi-sensei. Sakura flushed slightly in embarrassment, but nodded. Medical ignoring Naruto's surprised question, he pressed on. As for you Lee, I don't know any of your abilities at all. The only time I have ever seen you fight was during the exams nearly 3 years ago. The only information I know about you is you're very skilled in taijutsu and have great agility. Lee nodded. Then Shikamaru turned to their blonde teammate, and you. Well, you're Naruto. And that's all, Shikamaru said dismissively. Naruto still was curious about Sakura's said talent, but focused more on Shikamaru's vague description. What does that mean? Sakura chuckled, he means you're the #1 ninja at surprising people. More or less Naruto, he has no clue about what you have learned all this time, like all of us. Naruto mouthed a silent "oh" and then chose to leave it at that. Then finally there is me. Shikamaru announced, but paused when he noticed Naruto and Sakura share a snicker. What? Is it honestly that hard to envision me? Yes. The remaining half of Team 7 shouted in union at the shadow user. Shikamaru muttered troublesome, then reached for his map, gather around. He instructed as he kneeled down and unfolded the map on the hard and surprisingly clean concrete of the bridge. When Shikamaru was sure the group was listening, he began, we will be moving here, he pointed to a marked empty field on the map that was roughly a kilometer from the wave. Although you said we have 3 days, I would like you to leave behind several of your cage bunch in Naruto, and if something happens, I want them to intervene and notify us on what's happening. Naruto nodded and then stood up and took 2 steps back and formed his signature seal, Kage Bunshin no. A baker's dozen's worth of clones poofed into existence, each shared a glance with the original, and then they disappeared in numerous directions around the town. Naruto turned back and looked at his team. Done. He announced. Shikamaru nodded and then Sakura asked a brewing question. Where will we be staying throughout the mission? Shikamaru smirked, Tsunade-sama told me Naruto had taken care of that. All eyes were on Naruto, who grinned, Tsunade have given us a hotel to stay in the middle of the town during the entire course of the mission. He also has given us a tab that he has passed around all the town stores and food stands. So we have free food as well. Sakura's eyes widened in disbelief, you were able to get us all that. Naruto nodded and then said proudly, it required a few autographs and pictures taken with some of the customers in the hotel and the store owners, but it's all taken care of. Shikamaru nodded, okay, we will drop our stuff off in our hotel rooms first before moving to our spare destination. Lead the way Naruto. Naruto gave a mock salute which Shikamaru rolled his eyes at and then led the group through the town. During their journey Sakura couldn't help but notice the way most of the townspeople looked at Naruto and to an extent, herself as well. They looked to them with deep respect and gratitude and some even came over and shook their hands and gave their thanks again. Naruto, during the entire time wore a grand genuine smile. They really do treat Naruto like a living legend here, I'm glad he is finally getting the acknowledgement he deserved so long ago. Sakura thought in pride until she suddenly was met by a mob of fans. Once Sakura had signed a few autographs of her own, she was met by her smiling teammate, how awesome is Sakura-chan. Sakura sheepishly rubbed the back of her neck and nodded, did the same thing happen to you when you arrived? The blonde laughed, I didn't even make it halfway across the bridge, I think I made Iro-senin jealous. Naruto continued guiding them through the town with a few more minor pauses when he stopped the group outside a large building and announced, we are here. The group looked in awe at the hotel before them. The building itself was triple-storied, with what looked like a balcony on each floor per room. The building was painted maroon and had two large double doors as entrance into the plaza. Over the door were large, fine, silver-shaded letters that read as Hadakin. When they entered the building the group found nobody on duty at the counter. Naruto quickly explained that the entire hotel was granted to only them so they could carry on their business without fuss. He also explained that there was no room service because he felt Izuna was being far too generous by what he had offered them already and had refused the free service. The group agreed with Naruto, although Shikamaru silently announced to himself that he would have welcomed room service. Since Naruto's room was on the third floor, the others joined him. The room sequence in the end was Naruto adjacent to Sakura, with Lee in the room next to Naruto, along with Shikamaru next to Sakura. Once the others had packed, they regrouped in the dining lounge which was on the first floor. Shikamaru then addressed the team alright, let's move out. Chapter 14 Team Spars. The chosen spot indeed was more than suitable for Shikamaru's proposed spar. It was a large field, with a few tall trees scattered around the field, which were perfect for use as cover. So Shikamaru, how are we going to do this? Sakura asked. We are going to use Naruto's ridiculous amount of stamina and chakra to our advantage in this situation. Shikamaru proclaimed. Naruto looked confused but chose not to say anything, although he had a bad feeling about this, Naruto is going to spar. With all of us. The other team members raised their eyebrows in question, while Naruto also seemed to have paled considerably and released a nervous chuckle. Oh okay then. I don't mean all of us at the same time, Naruto is going to fight each of us one at a time. This way we will not lose focus on each person's fighting style in a four-way battle royal. Shikamaru made sure the others were with him before he asked his next question. Which of the three of us causes the most damage in an area? Lee didn't even give anybody a chance to speak and automatically responded loudly and in a conclusive tone. Sakura-san. Sakura was slightly flushed and crossed her arms looking at the ground before she emitted an annoyed grunt in agreement. Naruto blinked in puzzlement, wondering what it was that made Lee hold no trace of doubt. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow sharing the same suspicion but continued, well I can say for myself I'm the least destructive of the bunch. Sakura looked up, still embarrassed from earlier, does that mean you sparred with Naruto first? Nope. Sakura's eye twitched, why not? Shikamaru shrugged, it's too much of a drag to be honest. You lazy son of a Sakura withheld that thought, even though he was a lazy idiot, he was the team leader and had to respect his decisions. Even if the excuse was pathetic. Lee already put two and two together and smiled with a clenched fist waving in the air, oh. The time has finally come for our sparring Naruto-kun. Naruto smirked at the miniature guy's spirit, alright fuzzy brows, I warned you earlier though, I am going to clobber you to a pulp. Baka. Just shut up and get out there. Sakura growled. Naruto and Lee stood in the middle of the field at a distance of several meters and gave each other a stern stare. What are the rules for fuzzy brows? No high-level ninjutsus excluding Kage Bunshin, no gates. Naruto pouted, but fuzzy brows, that minuses most of my jutsus. So does that mean you haven't learned anything new then, Naruto? Shikamaru called, satisfied with the glare sent to him by the blonde. I know heaps more, but I would need to use the… Naruto cut his thoughts off harshly and mentally shook his head, no. Deal, fuzzy brows. Both combatants looked each other square in the eye as they issued their silent agreement on a countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. Lee covered the gap between him and Naruto in not even a second and spun around quickly in a spinning blur and shouted, Konoha Senpyu. The green blurred foot came to a solid stop when it collided with Naruto's head with a loud bash until a poof overlapped the successful strike, replacing Naruto in an explosion of dust. Lee felt a presence coming from the tree in front of him and looked up to gaze at the incoming rain of steel from. Lee snatched his nunchucks off of his utility belt and almost like a dance, deflected all of the kunai that would have collided with him, sending several flying in numerous directions as the two steels met. Lee's eyes suddenly widened however when the kunai that he deflected poofed into familiar balls of orange figures. Before the clones were upon him, Lee crouched into a small ball and readied his stance. I senpu. Lee then shot up several feet into the air, spinning his body around like a type of dancer, releasing a violent whirlwind of sharp chakra around him, sending the doppelgangers flying before disappearing from existence. Lee's small victory was cut short however when he saw a shuriken making a beeline towards him. Lee quickly prepared his nunchucks to stop the spinning blade right in its tracks. That is until the shuriken poofed into a pair of Naruto's and began a bombardment of punches and kicks at Lee in perfect synchronization, forcing Lee onto the defensive. Lee quickly did several backflips to get away from the pair until all he saw was orange. Lee surveyed his surroundings and noticed that he was encircled by at least 24 doppelgangers of Naruto. Lee couldn't help but smirk at one of the clones. I see you have improved your usage with the Kage Bunshin Naruto-kun. The voice behind Lee responded, and I see you have gotten faster yet again fuzzy brows. Also looks like you have practiced a lot with that weapon of yours too. Lee turned to face the direction of the voice, remaining in his stance in case he was to be ambushed. It's time to step this up a bit Naruto-kun. The voice answered from Lee's right, haha. Bring it fuzzy brows. Lee unconsciously flicked the nunchucks in one of his hands before clipping it back to his belt. Then he reached down for his knees and 2 loud clicks were heard. Lee then brought up and presented the weights to his orange crowd. Lee's smirk became wider when he heard numerous curses come from the clones. He was wearing weights. Baka. When does he not wear weights? Gee, sometimes you guys are a bunch of idiots. You or me. Baka. The curses were silenced when the ground began to rumble as Lee had let go of his weights and then began reaching for his wrists and a second 2 clicks were heard. Oh shit. Several of the clones whimpered as Lee repeated the same motion as before and stared straight into one of the Narutos in front of him, a Kimishu. And a second rumble was heard and then within a second several of the clones had been already destroyed. To the 2 observers on the side, Lee was nothing but a large green blur amongst the army of orange. Sakura was agape, amazing. She stuttered out, watching as the Narutos were poofing out of existence in seconds. Naruto amongst the clones gasped when he felt something zoom past him and delivered a firm kick in the back, shooting him across blasting into several other clones, dispersing them in one big poof. How fast is he? Quickly substituting himself with one of his Kage Bunshin, he was relieved when Lee had momentarily paused in surprise when he delivered a second blow to the now non-existent clone. He took the split pause to his advantage as he jammed his fingers together, Taju Kage Bunshin no. HAWWW. Let's go all out Naruto-kun. Lee shouted to the orange army coming into existence as Lee whipped out his nunchucks and resumed his blurred onslaught. While resuming his assault to find the real Naruto, Lee left behind dispersion clouds in his frenzied task. The fight was undeterminable because of the chaos until a loud crack was heard throughout the field. And the pair waited in anticipation and in Sakura's case worried as well as the large mass of smoke from the dissipated clones had cleared. What they saw though made their sweat drop. Lee had somehow made his nunchucks collide with his own face. Lee was rubbing his nose furiously as a small trickle of blood ran down his lower face. Sakura was afraid he broke his nose until she heard Lee speak, luckily not hearing the familiar muffled sound a broken nose would cause. That was clever Naruto-kun, dissipating your Kage Bunshin before I hit them, making me self-inflict damage on myself, you are a great strategist. Shikamaru snorted loudly at the bold claim, then they spotted Naruto waving his arms with an apologetic look on his face not far from Lee. Sorry fuzzy brows, it's not that I meant to do that, you were just hitting my clones so fast, you could hit them at least twice before they disappeared. Oh? I see. Lee mumbled, rubbing his nose once more before falling back into his stance. Let's continue with Naruto-kun. Naruto barely had enough time to react to Lee's sudden burst of speed, summoning a single clone to defend against Lee's onslaught of attacks. It was similar to before, but this time in complete reversal. Naruto was trying to contemplate his next move until his eyes narrowed when Lee wrapped his nunchucks around himself. What is fuzzy brows? Naruto didn't even get to finish his thought as he felt the chakra build up suddenly around the nunchucks and then his eyes widened, impossible. Naruto was again cut off from his thoughts as Lee shouted, Konoha Senpu. And flicked the nunchucks around so fast that even the Sharingan wouldn't see it coming. The result was a shockwave of chakra that was visible to the naked eye that arched around Lee's entire front. The shockwave collided with both of the Narutos and sent them airborne. Only one poof was heard, and that's when Lee acted. Lee lowered himself in a crouch and then sprung himself into the sky, shadowing Naruto from underneath his body. Before Naruto knew what happened, he felt the solid wrapping of bandages holding him in the air and his eyes widening in realization. Lee was about to call out the name of his until the most unexpected thing happened. Poof. All three shared the same expression of shock and confusion. How? Lee-san hit him. Cage Bunshin should disappear with a single hit. Lee, however, didn't have the luxury to think long about what had just happened though, as he saw several people waiting on the ground below him like a pack of dogs, waiting for a dangling piece of meat to fall off a stick. Lee reached for one of his kunai and cut the wasted bandages from his wrench, then he reached for his spear. Remember to aim shallow, this is just a friendly spar after all, Lee mused. Just before Lee landed and the surrounding Naruto-s were able to pounce, did Lee unlock the retracted spear. The moment Lee's feet hit the soft ground, he stood up as straight as humanly possible and then began rapidly spinning the spear around himself. To any other person, this would appear as an ordinary circus trick, to the trained eyes of a shinobi it was a sight to see. With each flick of the spear, Lee was releasing a small shockwave of sharp chakra that reached a couple of feet further than the spear's physical size. The several clones surrounding Lee all dispelled, along with the cry from the real Naruto, who was knocked a few feet backwards from the collision with the chakra. Lee stopped his attack and placed the spear diagonally across his back, keeping one hand firmly open in front of him, ready in case it was a trap. Naruto staggered to his feet, gripping his right shoulder which had a semi-sized gash going down. Naruto's expression wasn't really one of pain though, more shock. What was that? He staggered. Lee took a step back from Naruto and began his explanation. It took me a while, but I eventually learned how to branch my taijutsu-style attacks into my weapons. It's all thanks to Tenten and nickname Sensei I am where I'm at now with its control. I cannot mold chakra like an ordinary shinobi if you recall Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded his head at the explanation while looking at the gash on his shoulder. Then why did I get cut with that spear, but not with the nunchucks? Presenting said item, Lee continued, the reason these didn't hurt you before Naruto-kun was because the shape of the weapon doesn't have any fine sharp edges. Whereas this Lee lifted his spear up for emphasis has small sharp edges on its corners, because of this, instead of an arc forming like the nunchucks, a small sharp edge is formed when I release the chakra shockwave. This allows me to cut further than its actual physical reach. Had I wanted to Naruto-kun, I could have cut that arm right off. Naruto's eyes widened and he paled while unconsciously gripping his cut shoulder more. Well, good thing we are friends, hey. He began laughing nervously until asking in a slight hint of panic, right? Lee laughed, of course Naruto-kun. I would never do something like that to honestly anybody unless I had no choice. Naruto sighed in relief, he turned his head in question when he felt the soft but firm hand of Sakura on his non-injured shoulder. Let me see, Naruto. She spoke softly. Naruto did as he was told and allowed Sakura to see his right shoulder. He winced when she placed her palm over it. Don't be such a baby, Baka.